There is a moment in the history of Middle-earth that changes everything. A moment that most fans know happened, but almost no one fully understands. Sauron puts on the One Ring. We all know the image. We all know the aftermath. The elves hear him. The war begins. The ring becomes the central axis around which the entire history of the Second and Third Ages rotates. But what actually happened in that moment? What did Sauron experience? What did the ring do to him? Not to the world, not to the elves, not to the balance of power in Middle-earth, but to Sauron himself. What changed inside the being who put the ring on his finger? Because something did change. Something profound, irreversible, and ultimately devastating. The moment Sauron wore the One Ring was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment of transformation, and the transformation was not what Sauron expected. The ring gave Sauron power. The ring also took something from him, something he could never get back, something that he did not fully understand he was losing until the loss was complete. Tonight I want to explore that moment. I want to go deeper than the surface, deeper than the politics, deeper than the strategy, deeper than the military implications of the ring's power. I want to understand what the ring did to Sauron's nature, what it did to his identity, what it did to his soul, if a fallen Maya can be said to have a soul. The answer, I think, will change the way you understand the entire Lord of the Rings, because the ring is not what you think it is. The ring is not merely a weapon. The ring is not merely an instrument of domination. The ring is Sauron. The ring is the part of Sauron that he cut out of himself and placed into an object, and the cutting changed him in ways that Tolkien describes with a subtlety and a theological precision that most readers miss entirely. Stay with me. This is the story of how the Dark Lord destroyed himself in the act of making himself powerful. Part 1. Before the ring. Before we can understand what the ring did to Sauron, we need to understand what Sauron was before the ring existed. Because the being who forged the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom was not the being who emerged from the forging. The ring changed Sauron, and the change can only be measured against the baseline of what Sauron was before the change occurred. Sauron was a Maya of Ol, one of the divine spirits who served Ol the smith, the Vala who shaped the substance of the world, who loved craft and making and the patient work of shaping raw material into beautiful and useful forms. Sauron's original nature was the nature of a craftsman, a maker, a builder, a being whose deepest instinct was to take the raw material of the world and reshape it according to a vision of order and beauty. This is important. Sauron was not originally a creature of destruction. Sauron was a creature of creation, of craft, of order, of the desire to make things that worked, that functioned, that served a purpose. The impulse that would eventually drive Sauron to forge the One Ring was the same impulse that originally made him one of Ol's most gifted servants. The desire to make, to shape, to impose order on chaos, to create instruments that channeled power into purposeful action. Morgoth corrupted this impulse. Morgoth took Sauron's love of order and twisted it into a love of control. Morgoth took Sauron's gift for making and redirected it toward domination. The craft remained, the intelligence, the skill, the patient, methodical approach to problem-solving, but the purpose changed. The purpose was no longer beauty. The purpose was no longer service. The purpose was power. The purpose was the imposition of Sauron's will on the wills of others. The remaking of the world not according to a vision of beauty, but according to a vision of absolute order, with Sauron at the center. This is the being who arrives in a region in the Second Age. This is the being who approaches the elven smiths of Celebrimbor's guild, the Gwaith y Myrdain. the people of the jewel smiths, with an offer of knowledge, of collaboration, of shared craft. This is the being who calls himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and who presents himself as a servant of the Valar, a messenger of the divine powers. A being who has come to help the elves preserve and enhance the beauty of Middle-earth. The disguise is important. The disguise tells us what Sauron was still capable of being at this point in his history. Sauron could still take fair form. Sauron could still present himself as beautiful, as wise, as trustworthy. Sauron could still deceive through charm rather than through force. The being who walked into Eregion was not the armored, shadow-wreathed Dark Lord of the Third Age. He was a shapeshifter, a being of fluid identity, of multiple forms, of the kind of psychological flexibility that allows a creature to become whatever the situation requires. This flexibility is what the ring will destroy. Part 2. The craft of the rings. The collaboration between Sauron and the Elven Smiths is one of the most fascinating episodes in the history of Middle-earth, and one of the most misunderstood. Most fans think Sauron simply tricked the elves into making the Rings of Power. This is not quite right. The collaboration was genuine, at least on the surface. Sauron did teach the Elven Smiths real techniques. He did share real knowledge. He did contribute real expertise to the creation of the Lesser Rings and the methods that would eventually produce the Seven and the Nine. The collaboration produced real results, real objects of power, real instruments of preservation and enhancement, real tools that could slow the decay of the world and maintain the beauty of the elven realms. The deception was not in the craft. The deception was in the purpose. Sauron taught the elves to make rings of power that were compatible with a master ring, a controlling ring, a ring that could see through the others and dominate the wills of those who wore them. The elves did not know that the techniques Sauron taught them were designed to create vulnerability, to build into every ring a hidden backdoor, a concealed dependency, a structural weakness that only the master ring could exploit. Celebrimbor, the greatest of the Elven Smiths, eventually grew suspicious of Sauron. The suspicion came late, perhaps too late to undo the damage that had already been done, but it came in time to produce the three. Celebrimbor made the three elven rings, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, on his own, without Sauron's direct involvement. The three were made using the general techniques that Sauron had taught, but without Sauron's hands touching them, without Sauron's will guiding their shaping, without Sauron's corruption flowing through the smith's fingers into the gold. This is why the three are different from the Seven and the Nine. The three are less corrupted, less vulnerable to the One, more aligned with the elves' original purpose of preservation and healing rather than domination. But the three are still connected to the One. The three still depend on the techniques that Sauron taught. The three are still part of the system that Sauron designed. A system in which every ring of power is, at the deepest level, subordinate to the One. Celebrimbor's independence made the three better than the others, but it did not make them free. This is the context in which Sauron forges the One Ring. The other rings exist. The system is in place. The back door is built. All that remains is the key, the master instrument, the ring that will activate the hidden dependencies in all the others and bring every ring bearer in Middle-earth under Sauron's control. Part 3. The Forging. The forging of the One Ring takes place in the fires of Orodruin in Mount Doom, the great volcanic mountain in the land of Mordor, the place where the fire of the Earth's foundations reaches closest to the surface. The choice of location is not arbitrary. Sauron needs a fire that is not merely hot, but cosmically significant. A fire that connects to the deepest energies of the world, to the foundational forces that shaped Arda in the beginning. The forge of a normal smith would not suffice. The fires of even the greatest dwarven smithy would not be adequate. The One Ring requires a fire that reaches into the substance of creation itself, a fire that can channel the fundamental energies of the world into a physical object. Orodruin provides this fire. The mountain is not merely a volcano. It is a wound in the earth, a place where the raw, unformed energy of Arda's creation bleeds through the surface, where the fires that all used to shape the world still burn in their original intensity. Sauron, the Maya of all, knows this fire. He recognizes it. He understands its nature in a way that no elf or man or dwarf could understand it, because the fire is the fire of his own original master, the fire of the smith of the Valar, the fire of making. The irony is deliberate. Sauron uses the fire of his original master, the fire of creation, the fire of making, the fire that was meant to shape beauty, to forge an instrument of domination. The fire that all used to shape the mountains and the metals of the earth, Sauron uses to shape a ring of gold that will enslave the world. The corruption is complete. The gift of making has been fully redirected toward the purpose of control. The craftsman has become the tyrant. And now comes the moment that changes everything. The moment that most fans know about but very few understand. Sauron puts something into the ring. Not gold, there is plenty of gold. Not craft, the craft is in the shaping, in the design, in the techniques that Sauron has perfected over centuries of study. No, Sauron puts himself into the ring. He puts his own native power, his own spiritual substance, his own Maya nature, the fundamental essence of what he is, into the object. This is not a metaphor. This is not a poetic description. This is a literal, ontological, physical fact. Sauron takes a portion of his own being, a large portion, the greater part of his native power, and transfers it into the ring. The ring becomes a vessel for Sauron's essence. The ring becomes, in the most literal sense possible, a part of Sauron's body, an external organ, a detached limb, a piece of his soul housed in gold. The transfer is agonizing, or at least I think it must be. Tolkien does not describe the experience of the forging in detail, but consider what is happening. A conscious being is voluntarily extracting the greater part of his own spiritual substance and placing it into an inanimate object. The being is tearing himself apart, dividing what was whole, separating what was integrated, cutting the self into two pieces, and placing the larger piece in a ring of gold. The self-division is unprecedented. No being in the history of Arda has done this before. Not in this way, not with this precision, not with this deliberate concentration of essence into a single object. Morgoth disseminated his power into the world, but the dissemination was gradual, unconscious, the slow leaking of divine energy into the fabric of creation over the course of millennia. Sauron's investment is deliberate. Sauron is choosing to divide himself. Sauron is performing surgery on his own soul, cutting out the heart and placing it in a box, trusting the box to keep the heart safe while the body walks the world without it. The trust is the gamble. The box can be lost. The box can be stolen. The box can be carried to a volcano and thrown into the fire. The being who places his heart in a box is betting everything on the security of the box, and the bet, as we know, will eventually be lost. Part 4. What he put in. What exactly did Sauron put into the ring? Tolkien is surprisingly specific about this, more specific than most fans realize. Tolkien says that Sauron put the greater part of his own inherent power into the ring. Not a portion, not a fraction. The greater part. The majority. More than half of his native spiritual energy, the energy that made him a Maya, the energy that gave him the power to take physical form, to command other wills, to shape the world around him, was transferred into the ring. Think about what this means. Before the forging, Sauron's power was integrated, contained within his being, distributed throughout his spiritual and physical form, accessible at will. After the forging, Sauron's power was divided, split between two locations, his own being and the ring, with a larger portion in the ring rather than in himself. Sauron became, in a very real sense, less than he had been. The being who walked away from the forging was not the being who had entered the fire. The being who walked away was diminished, weaker in his own person, more dependent on the external object, more vulnerable to the loss of that object than he had been to any threat in his entire existence. But the diminishment was the point. Or rather, the diminishment was the price of the amplification. Because the ring does not merely store Sauron's power. The ring amplifies it. The ring takes the power that Sauron poured into it and focuses it, concentrates it, channels it through the structure of the rings of power in a way that makes the invested power far more effective than it would be if it remained inside Sauron's body. The analogy is imprecise but useful. Imagine taking the engine out of a car and connecting it to a power grid. The car can no longer move on its own. The car is diminished, weaker, less mobile, more vulnerable. But the engine, connected to the grid, can now power an entire city, can reach further, do more, affect more systems than it ever could when it was sitting inside a single vehicle. Sauron took his engine out and connected it to the grid. The grid is the system of the rings of power. The one ring is the hub, the central node, the point of connection, the interface between Sauron's power and the network of rings that extends across Middle-earth. Through the one, Sauron can see the other ring-bearers. Through the one, Sauron can influence the other ring-bearers. Through the one, Sauron can dominate the other ring-bearers, bending their wills to his, overriding their autonomy, absorbing their kingdoms and their peoples into the empire of his control. The power is enormous. The cost is everything. Part 5. The first wearing. And then Sauron puts the ring on. The year is approximately 1600 of the Second Age. Sauron stands in the heart of Mordor, in the shadow of Erodruin, in the land he has chosen as the seat of his power, and he slides the ring onto his finger. What happens next is one of the most significant events in the history of Middle-earth, and Tolkien describes it with a brevity that belies its importance. The elves hear him. Across the width of Middle-earth, in Eregion, in Lindon, in the elven realms scattered across the western lands, the elven ring-bearers and the elven smiths, who made the rings of power, suddenly become aware of Sauron. They feel him. They hear him. They perceive, through the connection that the rings create, the presence of a mind behind the rings, a controlling intelligence, a dominating will. A being who is looking through the rings and seeing the elves and reaching for their wills with the cold, calculated precision of a master seizing a tool. The elves are horrified. Celebrimbor and the smiths of Eregion realize, in a single devastating moment, that they have been deceived. That the beautiful stranger who called himself Anatar was a liar. That the techniques he taught them were designed to enslave, that every ring they have made is compromised, contaminated, connected to a master that they did not know existed. The elves take off their rings. This is the critical response, the immediate, instinctive, self-preserving reaction of beings who have suddenly discovered that they are wearing chains. The elves remove the rings from their fingers and sever the connection. The three are hidden. The system that Sauron designed to control the elves fails, not because the system is flawed, but because the elves perceive the trap before it closes. But consider Sauron's experience of this moment. Consider what the first wearing feels like from Sauron's perspective. Sauron puts on the ring, and for a single blazing instant, Sauron sees everything. He sees through every ring. He perceives every ring bearer. He feels the minds of the elven smiths, their thoughts, their intentions, their deepest purposes. The ring works, the system activates, the network comes online. And Sauron, standing at the center of the network, looking out through 100 eyes and listening through 100 ears, experiences a moment of total awareness. A moment in which his consciousness extends across the entirety of Middle-earth, touching every ring, reaching every bearer, grasping at the wills of every creature who wears one of the objects that his system has created. And then the connections go dead. One by one, the elves take off their rings. The network collapses. The eyes close. The ears go silent. The vast world-spanning consciousness that Sauron experienced for a single moment contracts, shrinking back to the dimensions of a single mind, a single body, a single being standing in the shadow of a volcano, wearing a ring of gold that has just revealed his true nature to every elf in Middle-earth. The contraction must be devastating. Imagine expanding your consciousness to encompass an entire continent, feeling every ring-bearer's thoughts, perceiving through every ring's eyes, touching every mind that wears one of the objects your system has created. And then, in a single instant, having all of that awareness ripped away, the world that was vast becomes small. The consciousness that was everywhere becomes here. The being who was, for one blazing moment, essentially omniscient within his designed domain becomes, once again, merely Sauron, powerful, brilliant, but local. Contained, limited, one mind in one body in one place. The first wearing is simultaneously Sauron's greatest triumph and his first defeat. The ring works. The system activates. The design is flawless, and the design's perfection reveals its maker, reveals Sauron to the very beings he intended to enslave, triggers the very response he was trying to prevent, destroys the very deception he spent centuries building. The first wearing proves that the ring works. The first wearing also proves that the ring's working is self-defeating, that the activation of the system is the destruction of the conditions that made the system viable. Part 6. The consequences of revelation. The first wearing of the ring is a catastrophe for Sauron, and the catastrophe is not what most fans think. The obvious consequence is strategic. The elves know about Sauron now. The elves know about the rings. The elves know that the rings are compromised. The deception that Sauron spent centuries building, the careful, patient, elaborate disguise of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, is shattered in a single moment. The elves are warned. The elves are on guard. The elves will not wear the rings that Sauron intended them to wear, and the grand strategy of domination through the ring network has failed before it properly began. But the deeper consequence is personal. The ring has changed Sauron, not metaphorically, literally. The act of pouring his power into the ring and then wearing the ring has altered Sauron's fundamental nature in ways that he cannot undo. Before the ring, Sauron was fluid. Sauron could change his shape. He could take fair form or foul form, beautiful or terrible, charming or threatening. He could be Anatar the Gift-Giver, or the Necromancer of Dol Guldur. He could adapt. He could disguise himself. He could become whatever the situation required. Because his identity was not fixed. It was flexible, mutable, the identity of a spirit that could wear bodies like costumes and shed them when they were no longer useful. The ring begins to change this. The ring begins to fix Sauron's identity, to anchor it, to crystallize it, to narrow the range of forms and identities that Sauron can inhabit. The process is not immediate. Sauron does not lose his shape-shifting ability the moment he puts on the ring. But the process begins, and the process is, I think, one of the most important and most overlooked consequences of the ring's creation. The ring is Sauron's identity, externalist. The ring contains the greater part of Sauron's native power, the power that defined him, the power that made him who he was. By placing this power into an object, Sauron has taken his identity out of himself and placed it into something external, something that can be separated from him, something that can be lost, something that can be taken. An identity that is housed inside you is flexible. You can change it, you can grow, you can adapt. An identity that is housed outside you is fixed. It is frozen in the form that it had when you placed it in the object. The ring contains Sauron's nature as it was at the moment of forging. The nature of a dominator, a controller, a being whose purpose is the subjugation of other wills. And the ring, once forged, does not change. The ring is static. The ring is permanent. The ring holds Sauron's nature in amber, preserving it, protecting it, but also preventing it from developing, from changing, from becoming anything other than what it was at the moment of its creation. Part 7. The War of the Elves and Sauron. The strategic failure of the first wearing leads directly to war. Sauron, exposed, furious, strips away the last pretense of the benevolent gift-giver and reveals himself as the Dark Lord. He demands that the elves return the rings, all of them, including the 3 that Celebrimbor made without his help. The demand is not merely strategic, it is personal. The rings are part of Sauron's system, part of the network that the One Ring was designed to control. The rings are, in a sense, extensions of the ring, and the ring is an extension of Sauron. The rings belong to Sauron because the rings are part of Sauron. Celebrimbor refuses, the elves refuse, and the war begins. The War of the Elves and Sauron is devastating. Sauron's forces overrun Eregion. Celebrimbor is captured, tortured, and killed, his body used as a banner by Sauron's forces, a desecration that reflects the personal nature of Sauron's rage. Sauron recovers the 9 and the 7. The 3 are hidden, smuggled out of Eregion before the fall, sent to Gil-galad and Galadriel for safekeeping. But I want to focus on something else about this war, something that reveals what the ring has already done to Sauron. Before the ring, Sauron was a deceiver. His primary method of operation was subtlety, manipulation, persuasion, the patient cultivation of trust and dependency. Sauron as Anatar did not conquer. He infiltrated. He did not wage war. He built alliances. The pre-ring Sauron was a creature of intelligence rather than force, a being who preferred to win through guile rather than through violence. After the ring, Sauron wages war. He raises armies. He invades Eregion with conventional military force. He besieges cities. He kills Celebrimbor, captures the greatest elven smith, tortures him for the location of the 3, and then, when Celebrimbor refuses to reveal where the 3 are hidden, kills him and mounts his body on a pole as a banner for the advancing army. He operates, for the first time in his post-Morgoth career, as a straightforward military conqueror rather than as a subtle manipulator. The shift is significant. The ring has changed Sauron's method, changed it from the indirect to the direct, from the subtle to the blunt, from the patient to the immediate. The ring has made Sauron more powerful, but less flexible. The ring has amplified Sauron's capacity for domination, but reduced his capacity for deception. The being who could once charm the elves into collaboration can now only command the orcs into battle. This is the first visible cost of the ring, the loss of subtlety. The being who wore the ring is narrower than the being who forged it. The identity that the ring preserves, the identity of the dominator, the controller, the Dark Lord, is expanding to fill the space that the other identities used to occupy. Sauron is becoming the ring, and the ring is domination. Part 8. The parallel with Morgoth. To understand what the ring does to Sauron, we need to understand the parallel between Sauron's ring and what Tolkien calls Morgoth's ring. Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, the mightiest of the Valar, Sauron's original master, did something similar to what Sauron does with the One Ring. But Morgoth did it on a vastly larger scale and with a vastly different result. Morgoth poured his power into the world, not into a single object, into the entire physical substance of Middle-earth. Morgoth's native power, the vast Valar-level energy that made him the mightiest of the Ainur, was disseminated into the matter of Arda, spread throughout the earth and the air and the water, woven into the fabric of the physical world. Tolkien calls this Morgoth's ring, the idea that the world itself became Morgoth's ring, the object into which Morgoth poured his essence. The consequence for Morgoth was devastating. By the end of the First Age, Morgoth was a shadow of his former self. The Valar who had once challenged the combined power of all the other Valar was reduced to a being who could barely leave his throne, who huddled in Angband, who was diminished by the very act of dissemination that had given him control over the physical world. Morgoth's power was in the world. But Morgoth was no longer in his power. The investment had drained the investor. Sauron learned from this. Sauron watched Morgoth's diminishment. Sauron observed the consequences of dissemination, the spreading of power so thin that the being who spread it was left empty, hollow, a shell around an absence. And Sauron drew a lesson: do not disseminate. Concentrate. The One Ring is Sauron's version of Morgoth's ring, but concentrated rather than disseminated. Where Morgoth poured his power into the world, Sauron pours his power into a single object. Where Morgoth's investment was spread across the entire physical substance of Arda, Sauron's investment is focused into a single band of gold. The concentration gives Sauron advantages that Morgoth did not have: precision, control, the ability to direct the invested power rather than simply radiating it outward in all directions. But the concentration also creates a vulnerability that Morgoth did not have. Morgoth's ring, the world itself, cannot be destroyed. You cannot unmake the physical substance of Middle-earth. Morgoth's investment is permanent, indestructible, woven into the fabric of reality. Sauron's ring can be destroyed. Sauron's investment is housed in an object that can be taken, that can be lost, that can be carried to the fire in which it was made and unmade. Sauron improved on Morgoth's method, but the improvement carried a fatal flaw. The flaw is concentration itself. Morgoth's disseminated power is unkillable, but it is also unfocused, weak at any given point, spread so thin that it cannot act with precision. Sauron's concentrated power is focused, but it is also killable, housed in a single object that can be carried to a fire and unmade. Morgoth's method produces an evil that is permanent but impotent. Sauron's method produces an evil that is potent but temporary. Neither method works. This is the deeper lesson, the lesson that encompasses both Morgoth and Sauron, both dissemination and concentration, both the flood and the lever. Evil that invests itself in external objects, whether the object is the entire world or a single ring, always pays more than it gains. The investment always costs more than the return. The power that is placed outside the self always takes more from the self than it gives to the self. The pattern is universal. The pattern is inescapable. The pattern is, Tolkien suggests, the fundamental law of evil's economy. You always lose more than you win. Sauron saw Morgoth's error and thought he could avoid it. Sauron could not. The error is not in the method. The error is in the impulse to extend the self beyond the self's natural limits. The impulse to reach further than the self was designed to reach, the impulse to control more than the self was given the authority to control. The method, dissemination, or concentration, is secondary. The impulse is primary. And the impulse always leads to the same place, the diminishment of the being who follows it. Part 9. The nature of the investment. Let me dwell on the nature of Sauron's investment, because the details matter enormously for understanding what the ring does to Sauron's character. When Tolkien says that Sauron put the greater part of his inherent power into the ring, the word inherent is doing critical work. Inherent power is not learned power. It is not acquired power. It is not the power that comes from knowledge or skill or experience. Inherent power is the power that a being is born with, the fundamental spiritual energy that makes a Maya, that distinguishes a divine spirit from a mortal creature, that provides the foundation on which everything else is built. Sauron did not put his knowledge into the ring. He did not put his intelligence into the ring. He did not put his memories or his skills or his understanding of craft into the ring. He put his essence into the ring, the raw, foundational, God-given spiritual substance that made him what he was. The distinction is important because it explains what Sauron retains and what he loses. After the forging, Sauron still has his intelligence. He still has his knowledge. He still has his understanding of craft and strategy and manipulation. The mind is intact. The personality is intact. The being who thinks Sauron's thoughts and makes Sauron's plans is still fully functional. What is missing is the power beneath the mind, the engine that drives the personality, the spiritual energy that transforms thought into action, that allows the mind to impose its will on the world, that gives Sauron the capacity to take physical form and maintain physical form and project physical force. The ring has the engine. Sauron has the steering wheel. And without the engine, the steering wheel controls nothing. This is why Sauron needs the ring. Not for the knowledge, he has the knowledge. Not for the intelligence, he has the intelligence. Not for the strategic vision, he has the strategic vision. Sauron needs the ring for the power to execute. The ring is the difference between planning and doing, between thinking and acting, between wanting to dominate the world and actually dominating it. Without the ring, Sauron is a brilliant mind with no force behind it. A general without an army, an architect without builders, a craftsman without tools. Part 10. The addiction. Here is where it gets dark. Here is where the story of the ring stops being a story about strategy and starts being a story about dependency. Sauron cannot take the ring off. This is not stated explicitly in the text. Tolkien does not write a scene in which Sauron tries to remove the ring and fails. But the logic of the situation is inescapable. The ring contains the greater part of Sauron's inherent power. Wearing the ring allows Sauron to access that power, to use it, to direct it, to channel it through his body and his will. Removing the ring would sever that access. Removing the ring would reduce Sauron to the diminished being that he becomes after the ring is cut from his hand, the weakened, formless, barely existing shadow that takes centuries to rebuild even a fraction of its former strength. Sauron will not voluntarily reduce himself to that state. Sauron will not choose weakness. Sauron will not surrender the power that the ring provides, even temporarily, even for strategic advantage, even to protect the ring from the risk of loss. The ring stays on Sauron's finger because Sauron cannot function without it, and the inability to function without it is the definition of dependency. The dependency is theological, not chemical. But the pattern is recognizable. The being who created the instrument of his power has become subordinate to the instrument. The maker has become the servant of the made. The craftsman has become the tool of the tool. Sauron does not use the ring. The ring uses Sauron. Or rather, the ring and Sauron have merged into a single system in which neither component is fully functional without the other. This is the trap. This is the trap that Sauron built for himself. The trap that he did not recognize as a trap until it had already closed around him. Sauron designed the ring to give him power over others. The ring gave him power over others, but the ring also gave itself power over Sauron, because Sauron, by investing the greater part of his essence in the object, made himself dependent on the object for the exercise of his own nature. The irony is exquisite and horrible. The being who designed the ring to enslave others has enslaved himself. The master of domination has been dominated, not by another will, not by an enemy, not by a power greater than his own, but by his own creation, by the instrument he forged for the purpose of controlling everyone else. Part 11. The ring as parasite. There is a way of thinking about the ring that Tolkien's text supports, but that most readers do not consider. The ring is a parasite. A parasite is an organism that lives off its host, that draws energy from the host, that depends on the host for survival, that cannot exist independently. The ring is exactly this. The ring draws its power from Sauron. The ring depends on Sauron for its existence. The ring cannot function without the spiritual energy that Sauron poured into it. The energy that is Sauron, that was taken from Sauron, that belongs to Sauron but that now resides in an external object over which Sauron's control is imperfect. But the parasite analogy has a second dimension. A parasite does not merely draw energy from its host. A parasite also influences the host's behavior, redirecting the host's actions toward the parasite's survival and reproduction, rewiring the host's instincts to serve the parasite's interests rather than the host's. The ring does this to Sauron. The ring redirects Sauron's behavior toward the ring's preservation. Sauron's obsession with the ring, his desperate need to recover it after it is lost, his willingness to devote all of his resources and all of his strategy to the ring's recovery, is not merely the behavior of a being who wants his weapon back. It is the behavior of a host whose actions are being shaped by a parasite, a being whose priorities have been altered by the object that lives off his power. Consider the Third Age. Consider Sauron's strategic position after his return. Sauron has rebuilt. Sauron has reoccupied Mordor. Sauron has raised armies, recruited allies, established a military position that is overwhelming in its strength. Sauron could, in theory, launch his war of conquest without the ring, using conventional military force, using the Nazgul, using the vast armies of Mordor and the East. But Sauron does not launch the war without the ring. Sauron waits. Sauron searches. Sauron devotes decades and centuries to the recovery of the ring, sending the Nazgul to scour the countryside, dispatching spies and agents, interrogating prisoners, focusing the entire intelligence apparatus of Mordor on the single question of where the ring is. Why? Because Sauron needs the ring. Because Sauron cannot imagine operating at full capacity without the ring. Because the ring has become so central to Sauron's identity, so deeply embedded in his conception of himself and his power, that the idea of acting without the ring is unthinkable. The ring has rewired Sauron's strategic thinking. The ring has made itself the center of Sauron's universe. The parasite has captured the host. Part 12. The loss of form. There is a moment, often overlooked, always devastating, when the full cost of the ring becomes visible. The moment is the destruction of Menor. Sauron, captured by the Einmenrians under Ar-Pharazôn, is brought to the island kingdom as a prisoner. But Sauron is not a prisoner for long. He corrupts the court. He subverts the king. He turns the mightiest civilization of men into a cult of Morgoth worship, redirecting the Einmenrians' fear of death into a hatred of the Valar and a mad attempt to assail the Blessed Realm. The attempt fails. The Valar call upon Ilúvatar. Ilúvatar breaks the world. Menor is swallowed by the sea. And Sauron's body, is destroyed in the cataclysm. But the ring survives. Sauron had the ring with him in Menor. The ring, housing the greater part of Sauron's power, endures the destruction that obliterates Sauron's physical form. And Sauron's spirit, tethered to the ring, survives as well, fleeing the drowning island as a dark shadow on the wind, carrying the ring back to Mordor, where Sauron will rebuild his body and resume his campaign. Here is the cost. Before Menor, Sauron could take fair form. Before Menor, Sauron could be beautiful, could appear as a wise counselor, a trustworthy ally, a being of light and charm and persuasive grace. After Menor, Sauron can never take fair form again. The destruction of his body and the drowning of Menor strips him of the ability to appear as anything other than what he is, a creature of darkness, a being of terror, a dark lord in the fullest and most literal sense. The loss is staggering in its implications. Consider everything that Sauron accomplished through fair form. The entire Anatar deception, the infiltration of Eregion, the collaboration with the elven smiths, the creation of the Rings of Power, was accomplished through fair form. Sauron's corruption of Ar-Pharazôn and the Einmenrian court was accomplished through fair form. The ability to appear beautiful, trustworthy, and wise was one of Sauron's most powerful weapons, arguably more powerful than any army, more effective than any fortress, more devastating than any siege engine. Through fair form, Sauron could accomplish in years of quiet manipulation what centuries of warfare could not achieve. And now the weapon is gone. Permanently, irreversibly, the Sauron who returns to Mordor after Menor is a Sauron who can never again walk into an elven city and offer gifts, can never again sit in a king's court and whisper counsel, can never again present himself as anything other than what his corruption has made him. A being of shadow and fire and iron. A presence that inspires terror rather than trust. A creature that can only command through fear rather than persuade through charm. This loss is not merely cosmetic. The loss of fair form is the loss of an entire mode of operation. The loss of Sauron's ability to deceive through beauty, to manipulate through trust, to achieve his goals through the patient cultivation of relationships rather than the blunt application of force. The Sauron who emerges from the wreck of Menor is a reduced being, not just physically but strategically, not just in form but in function. An entire dimension of Sauron's capability has been destroyed. And the ring is the reason. Not because the ring caused the destruction, but because the ring kept Sauron alive through the destruction, preserving his existence but not his wholeness, maintaining his continuity but not his completeness. The ring saved Sauron's life. The ring also ensured that the life it saved was diminished, that the being who survived was less than the being who had been destroyed. The ring preserves. But the ring does not restore. The ring keeps Sauron alive, but the ring does not keep Sauron whole. Part 13. The Last Alliance. The War of the Last Alliance, the great coalition of elves and men, led by Gil-galad the High King and Elendil the Tall, is the first test of what Sauron has become with the ring. Consider Sauron's position. Sauron has the ring. Sauron has the armies of Mordor. Sauron has the power of a Maya, amplified by the concentrated investment of his own essence in an instrument of domination. Sauron is, at this moment, at the height of his power, more powerful than he was before Menor, more powerful than he was during the War of the Elves and Sauron, more powerful than he has ever been or ever will be again. And Sauron loses. The Last Alliance defeats him. The combined forces of elves and men, lesser beings, mortal and diminished, fighting without divine assistance against a Maya with the most powerful weapon in the world, push Sauron back, besiege barad-dûr, and ultimately confront the Dark Lord in personal combat on the slopes of Orodruin. How? How does this happen? How does a being with the One Ring, a being who poured the greater part of his inherent power into an instrument designed to dominate other wills, lose to a coalition of beings whose wills he should be able to dominate? The answer reveals the ring's deepest limitation. The ring amplifies domination, not combat. The ring was designed to control the ring bearers, to see through the other rings, to bend the wills of those who wore them, to establish a network of mental dominion that would bring the elven lords and the dwarven kings and the human rulers under Sauron's authority. The ring was not designed for battlefield use. The ring does not make Sauron physically invincible. The ring does not turn Sauron into an unstoppable warrior. The ring makes Sauron a more effective dominator. And domination, in a straight-up military contest against opponents who are not wearing rings, is not the decisive advantage that Sauron needs. Gil-galad and Elendil are not wearing rings. The soldiers of the Last Alliance are not wearing rings. The beings who confront Sauron on the slopes of Mount Doom are outside the ring's designed sphere of influence, beyond the network, immune to the back door, resistant to the domination that the ring was built to project through the other rings. Against these opponents, the ring gives Sauron raw power, the concentrated spiritual energy of a Maya, but not the multiplied, network-amplified, ring-enhanced domination that the ring was designed to provide. The limitation is instructive. The ring was designed for a specific purpose, the subjugation of ring-bearers. The ring was not designed as a general-purpose weapon. The ring does not shoot lightning. The ring does not create force fields. The ring does not turn Sauron into an indestructible titan who can wade through armies untouched. The ring enhances Sauron's native power, his Maya-level spiritual energy, but the enhancement is channeled through the ring's specific design, which is the design of domination through the ring network. Outside the network, the ring's amplification is limited. The enhancement is real but proportional, not the exponential, system-multiplied power that the ring provides when operating through the other rings. This is a design flaw. Or rather, it is a design constraint, a consequence of the specificity that gives the ring its extraordinary effectiveness within its design domain, but limits its effectiveness outside that domain. Sauron built the ring to do one thing superlatively well: dominate ring bearers. In exchange for that superlative capability, the ring does other things merely well. The trade-off is the craftsman's trade-off. The choice between a tool that does everything adequately and a tool that does one thing perfectly. Sauron chose perfection. And perfection, by its nature, is narrow. Sauron fights with the power of a Maya. Gil-galad and Elendil fight with the courage of beings who are willing to die for their world. The Maya kills both of them. Gil-galad and Elendil fall in the combat. But the Maya is also overthrown. Isildur, Elendil's son, takes up his father's broken sword and cuts the ring from Sauron's hand. And Sauron collapses. Part 14. The collapse. The cutting of the ring from Sauron's hand is one of the most important moments in the history of Middle-earth and one of the most misunderstood. Most fans think of this moment as a military defeat. Sauron lost the battle. Sauron lost the ring. Sauron was beaten. This is true as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough. The cutting of the ring is not merely a defeat, it is a death, or something very like a death. Something that does to Sauron what death does to a mortal being, stripping away the physical form and leaving only the spirit behind. When the ring is cut from Sauron's hand, Sauron's body disintegrates. Not gradually, instantly, the physical form that Sauron has been maintaining collapses the moment the ring is separated from his flesh. The armor falls empty. The dark shape disperses. The body that housed Sauron's diminished spiritual presence, the body that was sustained, at least in part, by the power flowing from the ring, ceases to exist when the ring is removed. This tells us something crucial about what the ring had become for Sauron. The ring was not merely a source of power. The ring was a structural support, a load-bearing element of Sauron's physical existence, a component without which the rest of the structure could not hold together. Sauron's body was built on the ring's power. Sauron's physical form was maintained by the ring's energy. Remove the ring, and the body has no foundation. Remove the ring, and the structure collapses. Sauron's spirit survives. The spirit is not destroyed, it is diminished, weakened, reduced to a formless presence, a shadow, a will without a body. But the spirit endures. Sauron is not killed. Sauron is disembodied, stripped of his physical form, expelled from the material world, forced to exist as a bodiless consciousness that can think but cannot act, that can plan but cannot execute, that can desire but cannot reach. The disembodiment lasts for centuries. After the cutting of the ring, Sauron exists as a shadow, a formless, powerless, drifting presence, slowly, painfully, laboriously gathering the shreds of his remaining power, drawing on the diminished reserves of spiritual energy that he retained when he poured the greater part into the ring. The process of rebuilding takes nearly 1,000 years. 1,000 years of formlessness, 1,000 years of impotence, 1,000 years of being the most brilliant strategic mind in Middle-earth with absolutely no ability to do anything about anything. This is what the ring costs. This is the price of the investment. The being who poured his power into an external object is left, when the object is taken from him, with nothing, with the mind but not the means, with the will but not the way, with the ambition but not the ability. Part 15. The slow return. Sauron's return to power in the Third Age is a study in diminishment in the slow, painful, incomplete recovery of a being who has lost the greater part of himself. The first signs appear around the year 1000 of the Third Age, roughly 1,000 years after the last alliance. A shadow falls on the great forest of Greenwood, which begins to be called Mirkwood. A presence establishes itself in the fortress of Dol Guldur, in the southern reaches of the forest. The presence is mysterious. The wise suspect that it might be a Nazgul, or a lesser dark spirit, or some remnant of Morgoth's ancient corruption. It is not. It is Sauron. But a Sauron so diminished, so reduced, so far from the Dark Lord who wielded the One Ring, that even the wise cannot identify him. Gandalf eventually confirms the identification, ventures into Dol Guldur and discovers that the shadow in the fortress is Sauron himself. But the confirmation comes only after centuries of uncertainty, because the being in Dol Guldur is so much less than the being who fell at the last alliance that recognition is genuinely difficult. This diminishment is the ring's legacy. Every characteristic that defined Sauron's power during the Second Age, the physical presence, the military force, the capacity to project overwhelming dominion, has been drained from him by the loss of the ring. Sauron retains his intelligence. He retains his cunning. He retains his strategic vision. But the power to act on these qualities, the engine that drives the machine, is gone. The engine is in the ring. And the ring is in the Anduin, lying at the bottom of a river, waiting. Sauron's rebuilding during the Third Age is a study in making do with less. Sauron cannot take the form of a great warrior. The body that fought Gil-galad and Elendil is beyond his capacity to reconstruct. Sauron cannot project the overwhelming force that characterized his Second Age campaigns. The armies he raises in the Third Age are vast, but lack the Maya-powered command structure that made his Second Age forces so devastating. Sauron is operating at a fraction of his former capacity, a brilliant mind constrained by inadequate resources, a general who knows exactly what he wants to do, but who lacks the tools to do it. The Nazgul are Sauron's solution. The Nazgul, the 9 kings of men who were enslaved by the 9 rings, remain bound to Sauron through the ring's continuing existence. The 9 rings draw their power from the One, and the One, though lost, is not destroyed. The connection persists. The Nazgul persist. And the Nazgul become, in the Third Age, the primary instruments of Sauron's will, the extensions of his power, the hands that reach where his own hands cannot. Part 16. The Ring's Independent Life. While Sauron rebuilds in Dol Guldur, the Ring is doing something extraordinary. The Ring is acting on its own. Tolkien is explicit about this. The Ring has a will. The Ring has a purpose. The Ring operates independently of Sauron, seeking to return to its master, working to find a bearer who will carry it back to Mordor, manipulating the creatures who hold it toward actions that serve the Ring's ultimate goal of reunion with Sauron. The Ring's independent will is one of the most fascinating and most troubling aspects of the story. Where does the will come from? How does a piece of gold have a will? The answer, I think, is straightforward. The will comes from Sauron. The Ring contains the greater part of Sauron's inherent power, the power that includes, among other things, Sauron's will to dominate. The Ring is not merely storing Sauron's power. The Ring is expressing it. The Ring is acting out Sauron's deepest impulse, the impulse to control, to dominate, to bend other wills to its purpose. Independently, without Sauron's conscious direction, without Sauron's awareness, without Sauron's permission. The Ring is Sauron. The Ring is the part of Sauron that he placed outside himself, and that part, once outside, begins to act on its own. The Ring tempts Gollum. The Ring corrupts Bilbo. The Ring calls to Boromir. The Ring works on Frodo. The Ring does these things not because Sauron commands it to do them, but because the Ring is Sauron. Because the will to dominate that Sauron poured into the Ring is still functioning, still operating, still seeking the control that Sauron designed it to seek. The implication is staggering. Sauron has split himself. The forging of the Ring has created 2 entities, Sauron in the Ring and Sauron outside the Ring. The 2 entities share a common origin, a common nature, a common purpose. But they operate independently. They make separate decisions. They pursue the same goal through different means. And neither entity is fully Sauron. Neither entity possesses the complete being that Sauron was before the forging. Both are fragments, large fragments, powerful fragments, but fragments nonetheless, of a being that no longer exists as a unified whole. The split has consequences that Sauron did not foresee. The ring fragment of Sauron acts on its own impulses, impulses that are Sauron's impulses, but expressed without Sauron's strategic intelligence to guide them. The ring corrupts Gollum. Sauron would not have chosen to corrupt Gollum. Gollum is useless to Sauron, a wretched creature with no power, no influence, no strategic value. But the ring corrupts Gollum anyway, because the ring's will to dominate does not discriminate. The ring corrupts whatever is nearest. The ring reaches for whatever hand is available. The ring exercises Sauron's fundamental impulse, the impulse to control, without Sauron's judgment about which targets are worth controlling. The result is that the ring spends nearly 500 years in the hands of the most useless possible bearer, hidden under a mountain, clutched by a creature that has no contact with the outside world, completely inaccessible to Sauron. The ring's own corrupting influence traps the ring in the worst possible location. The ring's Sauron nature, the indiscriminate will to dominate, works against the ring's Sauron purpose, which is to return to the being who made it. The split is the ring's fundamental dysfunction. The ring is Sauron. But the ring is not all of Sauron. The ring has Sauron's impulses, but not Sauron's intelligence. The ring has Sauron's will, but not Sauron's wisdom. The ring is a fragment, and the fragment, operating without the whole, makes choices that the whole would never make. Part 17. The Eye. And now we come to the most iconic image in The Lord of the Rings, the Eye of Sauron. The eye is not metaphorical. This is a point that is often debated, but Tolkien's text supports the interpretation that the eye is a real physical manifestation of Sauron's presence. The eye is what Sauron has become, a lidless, sleepless, burning awareness, focused on the world from the summit of Barad-dûr, searching, watching, looking for the ring. The eye is Sauron without the ring. The eye is what remains when the greater part of Sauron's being has been placed into an external object and the object has been lost. The eye is consciousness without substance, will without body, awareness without form, the burning desire to control reduced to a burning point of light on top of a dark tower. The eye is terrifying. The eye is effective. The eye is one of the most powerful surveillance instruments in the history of fiction. A consciousness that can look across hundreds of miles, that can pierce disguises, that can find what is hidden and expose what is concealed. But the eye is also tragic. The eye is the emblem of Sauron's diminishment, the sign of what the ring has cost him, the symbol of the being he used to be reduced to the being he has become. Before the ring, Sauron had a body. He had hands that could forge, legs that could walk, a form that could sit on a throne, or stand on a battlefield, or kneel in a temple. After the ring, after the loss of the ring, after the centuries of disembodiment, after the slow, painful rebuilding that produced a presence but not a person, Sauron is an eye, a consciousness, a burning point of awareness without a body to act through. The eye watches, the eye sees. But the eye cannot reach, the eye cannot touch, the eye cannot pick up a sword or forge a ring or disguise itself as a gift giver. The eye is imprisoned in its tower, trapped at the summit of Barad-dûr, looking out over a world that it desperately wants to control, but that it can only watch. This is the ring's legacy. The being who forged the ring to extend his reach has had his reach reduced to sight. The being who designed the ring to multiply his power has had his power reduced to perception. The craftsman who once shaped metal with his own hands has become an eye that can only look at the world it can no longer touch. Part 18. The Ring's Return. And then the ring is found. Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit of the Shire, finds the ring in the depths of the misty mountains, in the tunnels beneath the Goblin Town, in the darkness where Gollum has been keeping the ring for nearly 500 years. Bilbo picks up the ring. Bilbo puts it in his pocket. Bilbo takes it home. The finding of the ring by Bilbo is, from Sauron's perspective, both the greatest hope and the greatest danger. The ring has resurfaced. The ring is no longer lost at the bottom of the Anduin, unreachable, unfindable. The ring is in the world again, in the hands of a living being, moving through the landscape of Middle-earth, potentially recoverable. But the ring is in the hands of a hobbit. And hobbits are, from Sauron's perspective, invisible, too small, too insignificant, too far from the centers of power to register on the Dark Lord's awareness. Sauron does not know about hobbits. Sauron does not think about hobbits. The vast surveillance apparatus of the eye, the all-seeing, all-perceiving consciousness that watches from the top of Barad-dûr, is oriented toward the great powers, the major players, the beings who might plausibly possess and wield a weapon of cosmic significance. Hobbits do not appear on this radar. Hobbits are beneath notice. This blindness, this inability to perceive the small, the humble, the insignificant, is another consequence of the ring. The ring has narrowed Sauron's perception. The ring has trained Sauron's awareness toward power, toward the great, the mighty, the dominant. The ring has made Sauron a being who can only see power, who can only perceive the world through the lens of domination, who can only recognize the kinds of beings and the kinds of actions that the ring was designed to interact with. The ring was designed to dominate the ring bearers, the elven lords, the dwarven kings, the human rulers. The ring was not designed to interact with hobbits. Hobbits do not wear rings of power. Hobbits are not lords or kings or rulers. Hobbits are gardeners and farmers and cooks, beings whose power is not the kind of power that the ring was built to detect. And Sauron, whose perception has been shaped by the ring, whose consciousness has been trained by millennia of ring-mediated awareness, cannot see what the ring was not designed to detect. The blindness to hobbits is not a strategic error. It is a structural limitation, a consequence of the ring's design, a flaw in the instrument that Sauron built to see the world. The ring shows Sauron power. The ring does not show Sauron humility. And the humility of hobbits, the smallness, the simplicity, the quiet, unassuming, deeply rooted goodness of the halflings, is the thing that will ultimately destroy the ring and Sauron with it. Part 19. The fear. There is something that Sauron fears, and the fear tells us everything about what the ring has done to him. Sauron fears the ring being used against him, not destroyed. Sauron's primary fear during the War of the Ring is not that someone will carry the ring to Mount Doom and unmake it in the fire. Sauron's primary fear is that someone will put the ring on, someone powerful, someone with the will and the capability to master the ring and turn its power against its maker. This fear shapes Sauron's entire strategy during the War of the Ring. Sauron assumes that the ring will be used. Sauron assumes that the enemy, Gandalf, Aragorn, Galadriel, some figure of power and authority, will claim the ring and wield it. Sauron's military campaign is designed around this assumption. Sauron attacks as quickly as possible, throwing his forces at Gondor and Rohan, trying to win the war before the enemy can master the ring and deploy it against him. The fear is revealing. Sauron fears the ring because Sauron knows what the ring contains. Sauron knows that the ring holds the greater part of his own inherent power. Sauron knows that a being of sufficient could theoretically seize that power, wrest control of it from Sauron, redirect it, turn the domination that the ring was designed to project back against the being who designed it. The ring can be used against its maker because the ring is its maker. The power in the ring is Sauron's power. A being who masters the ring masters Sauron, masters the engine that drives Sauron's will, the force that sustains Sauron's existence, the spiritual substance that makes Sauron what he is. To master the ring is to master Sauron's own essence, to take ownership of Sauron's identity, to become, in a very real sense, more Sauron than Sauron. This is the nightmare. The being who poured himself into an external object has created the possibility of his own displacement, the possibility that someone else could pick up the object and become the person that the object contains. The ring does not merely hold Sauron's power. The ring holds Sauron's self. And the self, housed in an external object, is available to anyone who can master the object. Part 20. The vulnerability. The ring creates a vulnerability that Sauron never had before. A vulnerability that is unique to Sauron, that no other being in Middle-earth shares, that is the direct and unavoidable consequence of the investment that Sauron made when he forged the ring. Before the ring, Sauron was a Maiar. Maiar are incredibly difficult to destroy. A Maiar's spirit is not housed in a physical body the way a mortal's spirit is. A Maiar's body is a construct, a form that the spirit creates and inhabits, not a container that the spirit depends on. If a Maiar's body is destroyed, the spirit survives. The spirit may be weakened, the spirit may take centuries to rebuild a new body, but the spirit endures. The destruction of the body is not the destruction of the being. This is why Gandalf survives his battle with the Balrog. Gandalf's body is destroyed, killed on the peak of Zirak-Zagil, slain by the extremity of the combat. But Gandalf's spirit survives. Gandalf is sent back by the Valar, given a new body, elevated from grey to white. The destruction of the body is a setback, not a termination. For Sauron without the ring, the same logic would apply. If Sauron's body were destroyed, his spirit would survive. The spirit would be weakened, diminished, forced to spend centuries rebuilding, but the spirit would endure. Sauron without the ring is hard to kill permanently, because Sauron without the ring is still a Maiar, still a spirit that exists independently of its physical form. The ring changes this equation. The ring creates a kill switch. If the ring is destroyed, Sauron is destroyed. Not disembodied, destroyed. Not weakened, annihilated. Not reduced to a shadow that can rebuild over centuries. Reduced to a shadow so diminished that it can never rebuild, never take form, never act in the world again. The destruction of the ring is the permanent end of Sauron, the irrevocable termination of the being who poured his essence into the object. This is extraordinary. This is unprecedented. No other Maiar in the history of Middle-earth has this vulnerability. No other being, except Morgoth, who poured his essence into the world and was destroyed when the Valar judged him, has made itself killable by tying its existence to an external object. Sauron has done something that no one else has done. He has created a physical object whose destruction will cause his own permanent death. The ring is Sauron's mortality. The ring is the thing that makes Sauron killable. Before the ring, Sauron was effectively immortal. A spirit that could be disembodied but never destroyed, that could be scattered but never extinguished, that could be diminished but never ended. After the ring, Sauron has a weakness, a single, specific, identifiable weakness that any sufficiently determined hobbit can exploit, by walking to a volcano and dropping a piece of gold into a fire. The irony is excruciating. The being who forged the ring to make himself more powerful has made himself more killable. The being who invested his essence in the ring to extend his reach has created the mechanism of his own permanent destruction. The ring was supposed to be Sauron's greatest strength. The ring is Sauron's greatest, and only, vulnerability. The instrument of domination is also the instrument of annihilation. The weapon is also the weakness. The shield is also the target. Part 21. The narrowing. The ring does not merely change Sauron's power structure. The ring changes Sauron's mind. This is the most subtle and the most devastating of the ring's effects. The gradual narrowing of Sauron's consciousness, the slow contraction of his awareness, the progressive reduction of a complex, flexible, multifaceted intelligence into a single-minded instrument of domination. Before the ring, Sauron was many things. Sauron was a craftsman. Sauron was a deceiver. Sauron was a strategist. Sauron was a shapeshifter. Sauron was a being of multiple capabilities, multiple approaches, multiple identities. The pre-ring Sauron could be Anatar the Gift-Giver, or the Lord of Werewolves on the Isle of Tol in Goroth. He could play the humble emissary, or the fearsome warmonger. The range was enormous. After the ring, Sauron narrows. The ring channels Sauron's consciousness into a single mode, the mode of domination. The ring trains Sauron to think in terms of power, control, hierarchy, command. The ring shapes Sauron's perception to see the world as a system to be dominated, a collection of wills to be bent, a network of beings to be brought under the authority of a single controlling intelligence. The narrowing is visible in Sauron's behavior across the ages. In the Second Age, before the ring is lost, Sauron is already becoming more rigid, more focused on military conquest, less capable of the subtle manipulation that characterized his early career. In the Third Age, after the ring is lost but before it is found, Sauron is reduced to the eye, a consciousness that can only watch, only search, only look for power. By the time of the War of the Ring, Sauron is so narrowed that he cannot conceive of the possibility that someone might destroy the ring rather than use it. This last point is critical. Sauron cannot imagine the destruction of the ring because Sauron cannot imagine the willingness to surrender power. The ring has trained Sauron to think exclusively in terms of gaining power, wielding power, accumulating power. The idea of voluntarily giving up power, of carrying the most powerful object in the world to a volcano and throwing it into the fire, is literally unthinkable to Sauron. Not strategically unthinkable. Cognitively unthinkable. The neural pathways that would allow Sauron to conceive of voluntary power surrender have been atrophied by millennia of ring-shaped thinking. The narrowing is the ring's deepest victory over Sauron. The ring has not merely captured Sauron's power. The ring has captured Sauron's mind. The ring has taken the flexible, multifaceted, strategically creative intelligence of the greatest of Morgoth's servants and reduced it to a single, fixed, endlessly repeated algorithm: dominate, control, possess. The mind that once contained the whole range of dark creativity has been compressed into a single channel, and the compression is the ring's doing. Part 22. What Sauron lost. Let me catalogue the losses. Let me list as precisely as possible what the ring took from Sauron, what the being who forged the ring no longer possesses, what the act of investment cost the investor. Sauron lost his independence. Before the ring, Sauron was a self-contained being, a Maya whose power was integrated, internal, accessible without reference to any external object. After the ring, Sauron is dependent, tied to the ring for the exercise of his own power, unable to function at full capacity without access to the object that holds the greater part of his essence. Sauron lost his flexibility. Before the ring, Sauron could take any form, fair or foul, beautiful or terrible, charming or threatening. After the ring, Sauron is fixed, trapped in a single mode of presentation, unable to disguise himself, unable to deceive through beauty, unable to operate through any method other than force and fear. Sauron lost his resilience. Before the ring, Sauron could survive the destruction of his body and rebuild, slowly, painfully, but completely. After the ring, Sauron's survival depends on the ring's survival. The destruction of the ring is the destruction of Sauron. The immortal has become mortal, not in the normal sense, but in the sense that his existence now has a single point of failure. Sauron lost his perception. Before the ring, Sauron could see the world in its fullness, could perceive beauty and ugliness, power and humility, the great and the small. After the ring, Sauron sees only power, only the movements of the mighty, only the actions of the dominant, only the things that the ring was designed to detect. The small, the humble, the insignificant, these are invisible to Sauron. And it is the invisible that will destroy him. Sauron lost his imagination. Before the ring, Sauron could conceive of multiple strategies, multiple approaches, multiple possibilities. After the ring, Sauron can only think in terms of domination, can only imagine futures in which the ring is worn, power is wielded, and wills are bent. The possibility that someone might choose not to use power, might choose to destroy it, to give it up, to throw it into the fire, is beyond Sauron's comprehension. The ring has made Sauron incapable of imagining his own defeat. And finally, most devastatingly, Sauron lost himself. The being who forged the ring is not the being who exists in the Third Age. The Sauron of the Third Age is the ring's Sauron, a creature shaped by the ring's nature, defined by the ring's purpose, narrowed by the ring's influence into a being that serves the ring's function. The original Sauron, the Maya of all, the gifted craftsman, the flexible and creative intelligence that once served Morgoth with such devastating effectiveness, is gone, consumed by the ring, replaced by the eye. Part 23. The Mirror of Morgoth. The parallel between Sauron and Morgoth becomes, at this point, devastating. Morgoth poured his power into the world. The world became Morgoth's ring. And Morgoth was diminished, reduced from the mightiest of the Valar to a being who could barely sit on his throne, who was consumed by the investment, who was destroyed by the very act that gave him control over the physical substance of Arda. Sauron poured his power into the ring. The ring became Sauron's world. And Sauron was diminished, reduced from a versatile, shape-shifting, strategically brilliant Maya to a single burning eye, consumed by the investment, on the verge of being destroyed by the very act that gave him control over the ring-bearers of Middle-earth. The parallel is not coincidence. The parallel is theology. Tolkien is showing us a pattern of evil that repeats because the nature of evil requires it to repeat. Evil invests. Evil takes the power that it has and places it outside itself, into the world, into an object. Evil does this because evil wants control. Evil wants to reach further, to dominate more, to extend its authority beyond the boundaries of its own being. And the only way to reach further is to invest, to take something from the inside and place it on the outside, to extend the self beyond the self's natural limits. But the investment always costs more than it gains. The reach extends, the control expands. But the being who reaches and controls is diminished by the reaching and the controlling, drained by the investment, hollowed by the giving, reduced by the very act of expansion. Morgoth reaches for the world and loses himself. Sauron reaches for the ring-bearers and loses himself. The pattern is the same. The cost is the same. The result is the same. A being who started with everything and ended with nothing, consumed by the hunger for more. This is Tolkien's deepest theological insight about evil. Evil is self-devouring. Evil does not merely harm others. Evil harms itself. The Dark Lord who forges the ring to enslave the world is the first slave of the ring. The being who designs the instrument of domination is the first being dominated by the instrument. Evil turns inward. Evil consumes itself. Evil, in the end, is not conquered by good. Evil is conquered by its own nature, by the inherent, unavoidable, structurally inevitable tendency of evil to destroy the thing it claims to serve. Part 24. The theological trap. There is a concept in Christian theology that I think Tolkien had in mind when he wrote the story of the ring. A concept that illuminates the nature of Sauron's trap and the reason why the trap is inescapable. The concept is idolatry. Not idolatry in the popular sense, the worship of graven images. Idolatry in the theological sense, the placing of one's ultimate value, one's deepest commitment, one's fundamental identity in something other than God. The replacement of the divine with the created. The substitution of the made for the maker. Sauron commits idolatry. Sauron takes his divine nature, the inherent power that was given to him by Ilúvatar, the spiritual substance that makes him a Maya, the essence that connects him to the divine order of creation, and he places it in a made object. He takes the God-given and invests it in the self-made. He takes the divine and replaces it with the crafted. The ring is Sauron's idol. The ring is the object that Sauron worships, not in the sense of bowing down before it, but in the deeper sense of placing his ultimate value in it. The ring is the thing that Sauron cannot live without. The ring is the thing around which Sauron organizes his existence. The ring is the center, the axis of Sauron's world, the point around which everything else revolves. The theological trap is simple. When you place your identity in an object, you become the servant of the object. When you make an idol, you do not control the idol. The idol controls you. The thing you worship becomes the thing you serve, and the service is absolute, because the thing you worship is the thing you cannot live without. Sauron cannot live without the ring. Therefore, Sauron serves the ring. Not consciously, not willingly, but structurally, inevitably, inescapably, Sauron's entire existence, every strategy, every plan, every campaign, every thought, is oriented toward the ring. Toward recovering the ring, toward protecting the ring, toward ensuring the ring's survival, because the ring's survival is Sauron's survival. The idol has captured the idolater. The created has enslaved the creator. The ring, which Sauron made to serve him, has become the thing that Sauron exists to serve. The relationship has inverted, and the inversion is the nature of the trap. The trap is not that Sauron was tricked by someone else. The trap is that Sauron tricked himself, built the trap with his own hands, entered it with his own feet, closed it around himself with his own will. Part 25. The ring-bearer problem. There is a consequence of the ring's nature that creates one of the most interesting problems in the story. The ring does not want to return to Sauron. Wait, that sounds wrong. Let me rephrase. The ring wants to return to Sauron, but the ring also wants to be worn. And the ring's desire to be worn, its constant, relentless, manipulative effort to place itself on the finger of a new bearer, creates situations that conflict with the ring's desire to return to its master. The ring corrupts its bearers. The ring makes its bearers possessive. The ring makes its bearers unwilling to give it up. The ring, in short, does to its bearers what it did to Sauron. It makes them dependent, addicted, unable to imagine existence without the ring. And the dependency makes the bearers less likely to return the ring to Sauron, because the bearers want the ring for themselves, want to keep it, want to hoard it, want to use it for their own purposes rather than surrendering it to its maker. Gollum is the perfect example. Gollum has the ring for nearly 500 years. During those 500 years, the ring does not return to Sauron. The ring stays in the dark, under the misty mountains, hidden from the world, because the bearer, the creature that the ring has captured and corrupted, will not let it go. The ring's own corrupting influence works against the ring's stated purpose. The power that the ring uses to enslave its bearer is the same power that prevents the bearer from returning the ring to its master. The paradox is the ring's self-defeating nature. The ring is designed to dominate. The ring dominates its bearers. The dominated bearers refuse to surrender the ring. The ring, by doing exactly what it was designed to do, dominating wills, prevents itself from achieving its ultimate goal of returning to Sauron. This is, I think, the deepest expression of the principle that evil is self-defeating. The ring's own nature works against its own purpose. The domination that the ring projects is the force that keeps the ring away from the being who needs it most. Sauron's instrument of control is so effective at controlling that it controls itself out of Sauron's reach. Part 26. The War of the Ring. The War of the Ring is, from Sauron's perspective, a war of recovery, a campaign to get back the part of himself that he lost. Consider the war from Sauron's point of view. The ring has been found. The ring is in the possession of a hobbit named Frodo, who is carrying it across Middle-earth, carrying Sauron's essence, Sauron's power, Sauron's identity across the landscape, through the territories of the free peoples, towards some destination that Sauron cannot quite discern. Sauron sends the Nazgul, the 9 wraiths, the most faithful, the most relentless, the most terrifyingly effective servants that Sauron possesses, are dispatched to find the ring and bring it home. The Nazgul are perfect for this mission. They are connected to the ring through the 9 rings. They can sense the One Ring's presence. They are bound to Sauron's will absolutely and cannot be distracted or corrupted or turned. But the Nazgul fail. The hobbit escapes. The ring continues to move, through the Shire, through Bree, through Rivendell, through the mines of Moria, across the length and breadth of Middle-earth. And Sauron, watching from his tower, tracking the ring's movements through the occasional flickers of awareness that the ring provides, grows increasingly desperate. The desperation drives the war. Sauron attacks Gondor not merely to conquer it, but to prevent the ring from reaching a hand powerful enough to wield it. Sauron attacks Rohan not merely to destroy it, but to eliminate an ally that might shield the ring bearer. Every military operation during the War of the Ring is, at the deepest level, an operation in pursuit of the ring, an attempt to recover the lost part of Sauron, to reintegrate the divided self, to become whole again. The war is a surgery. Sauron is trying to graft his missing limb back onto his body. The campaigns, the sieges, the battles, all of them are the frantic, desperate actions of a being who is missing the most important part of himself and who cannot rest until the part is recovered. Part 27. The Fatal Assumption. Sauron's single greatest mistake during the War of the Ring is the assumption that the enemy will use the ring. This assumption is not stupid. This assumption is logical. From Sauron's perspective, from the perspective of a being whose entire existence revolves around the pursuit of power, whose mind has been shaped by millennia of ring-mediated thinking, whose consciousness has been narrowed to the single channel of domination, the assumption that someone will use the ring is not merely reasonable. It is the only conceivable possibility. Why would anyone not use the ring? The ring is the most powerful object in Middle-earth. The ring confers dominion over all living things. The ring amplifies the bearer's native power to levels that make the bearer virtually unstoppable. Why would anyone carry the ring to a volcano and throw it into the fire when they could put it on their finger and become the ruler of the world? Sauron cannot answer this question, because Sauron cannot understand the mindset that would produce the answer. The mindset that says power is not the highest good. The mindset that says there are things more important than control. The mindset that says the ability to dominate is not the same as the right to dominate, and the wisest course may be to surrender power rather than to wield it. This mindset, the mindset of the hobbit, the mindset of the small and the humble and the unpretentious, is the mindset that the ring has made Sauron incapable of comprehending. The ring has trained Sauron to think like a ring, and the ring thinks in one direction only, toward power, toward control, toward the accumulation and the exercise of domination. The fatal assumption is not a lapse in Sauron's intelligence. Sauron's intelligence is intact. Sauron's intelligence is operating at full capacity. The fatal assumption is a lapse in Sauron's imagination, a failure of the capacity to conceive of alternatives, to envision possibilities that fall outside the narrow channel that the ring has carved in Sauron's mind. Sauron cannot imagine the destruction of the ring because Sauron cannot imagine the voluntary surrender of power. And Sauron cannot imagine the voluntary surrender of power because the ring has spent millennia teaching him that power is the only thing that matters. The ring has defeated Sauron, not in combat, not through strategy, through psychology. The ring has shaped Sauron's mind so thoroughly that Sauron cannot conceive of the one scenario that would destroy him, and the inability to conceive of the scenario is the reason the scenario succeeds. Part 28. The Moment on the Mountain. Let me take you to Mount Doom. Let me take you to the moment that ends the story, the moment that answers the question we have been asking since the beginning. Frodo stands on the edge of the crack of doom. The fire burns below. The ring is on a chain around his neck. The mission is complete. The destination is reached. The ring needs only to be released, dropped, thrown, surrendered to the fire that made it. And Frodo puts the ring on. This is the moment that Sauron has been waiting for. Not the moment of destruction, the moment of claiming. Frodo does exactly what Sauron assumed someone would do. Frodo claims the ring. Frodo puts the ring on his finger and declares it for his own. And Sauron sees him. The instant the ring goes on Frodo's finger, Sauron's awareness snaps to the crack of doom like a searchlight locking onto a target. Sauron perceives Frodo. Sauron perceives the ring. Sauron perceives, with a clarity that is described as utter and immediate, the precise location of the ring and the precise nature of the threat. And in that moment of perception, Sauron understands something he has not understood until now. Sauron understands that the ring is not being used. The ring is being carried to the place of its destruction. The ring is not on the finger of a conquering lord, or a rival dark lord, or a warrior king. The ring is on the finger of a hobbit, a small, exhausted, traumatized hobbit standing on the edge of a volcanic fissure in the heart of Mordor. The understanding hits Sauron like a physical blow. Tolkien describes the moment. The magnitude of Sauron's own folly is revealed to him, and he is filled with a great dread. Not anger, dread. The being who has spent 3,000 years searching for the ring, building toward the ring, orienting every aspect of his existence around the recovery of the ring, this being suddenly realizes that the ring is about to be destroyed. That the enemy's plan was never to use the ring, but to unmake it. That the assumption on which Sauron has based his entire strategy is wrong. The dread is not merely the fear of death. The dread is the recognition of self-deception. Sauron sees, in a single blazing instant, the totality of his error, sees that the ring has blinded him, sees that the investment has trapped him. sees that the instrument he created to control the world has controlled him, has shaped his mind, has narrowed his perception until the one possibility that could destroy him was invisible to him. The timing of the understanding is devastating. Sauron understands his error at the exact moment when the error becomes irreversible. Not a year earlier, when the understanding might have changed the strategy. Not a month earlier, when the Nazgul might have been redirected. Not an hour earlier, when a single orc patrol might have intercepted the hobbits on the slopes of the mountain. At the exact moment when Frodo claims the ring, at the exact moment when the ring's location and the ring's vulnerability are simultaneously revealed, Sauron understands everything and can do nothing. The cruelty of the timing is theological. The understanding arrives too late because the understanding was prevented by the very instrument that the understanding concerns. Sauron could not see the possibility of the ring's destruction because the ring would not let him see it. The ring shaped Sauron's mind. The ring narrowed Sauron's perception. The ring made itself invisible to Sauron's strategic thinking, not through malice but through the structural logic of its design. The ring was designed to make domination the only conceivable mode of thought. And domination, as a mode of thought, cannot conceive of its own voluntary termination. Sauron's dread, in the final moment, is the dread of a being who sees his entire life from the outside, who sees, for the first time, the pattern that was invisible from the inside. The pattern is simple. The ring consumed him. The ring replaced him. The ring turned the greatest craftsman in Middle-earth into the greatest prisoner in Middle-earth. And the prison, the beautiful, golden, perfectly crafted prison, is about to be destroyed, and the prisoner is about to be destroyed with it, and there is nothing that the prisoner can do except watch the fire rise. Part 29. The Destruction. Gollum bites the ring from Frodo's finger. Gollum dances on the edge of the crack of doom, holding the ring aloft, exulting in the recovery of his precious. And then Gollum falls, stumbles, steps backward into the void, plunges into the fire with the ring still clutched in his hand. The ring enters the fire of Orodruin. The gold melts. The inscription fades. The power that Sauron poured into the ring, the greater part of his inherent spiritual energy, the essence that he invested in the object over 3,000 years ago, is released. And Sauron dies. Not disembodied, not diminished, not reduced to a shadow that will rebuild over centuries. Dies. The destruction of the ring is the permanent, irrevocable, absolute termination of Sauron's existence as a being of power and agency in the world. Tolkien describes what happens. A vast shadow rises over Mordor, stretching across the sky like a great threatening hand. And then a wind comes, a wind from the west, from the direction of the Blessed Realm, from the direction of the Valar, and the shadow is blown away. Dispersed, scattered, reduced to nothing. The image is deliberate. The shadow, Sauron's spirit, the diminished remnant of the Maya who once served all, is blown away by a wind from the west. The Valar's breath disperses the shadow. The divine power that Sauron rejected when he chose Morgoth over his original master completes the destruction that the ring's unmaking began. Sauron is not merely killed by the fire. Sauron is dismissed by the divine order, swept away, like dust, like ash, like the remnant of a fire that has burned out. What remains of Sauron after the destruction? Tolkien tells us, a spirit so reduced, so diminished, so utterly drained of power that it can never again take form, never again act in the world, never again impose its will on any living thing. Sauron exists, in some minimal, spectral, impotent sense, as a thought without a thinker, a will without a way, a consciousness without the capacity to do anything with its consciousness. The consciousness remains. the awareness persists. But the power, the inherent power that was invested in the ring, is gone. Destroyed, unmade in the fire. And without the power, the consciousness is useless. A mind without a body, a general without an army, a pilot without a plane. The permanence of the destruction is worth dwelling on. When Sauron lost the ring at the last alliance, the loss was temporary. The ring still existed, the power still existed. The investment was intact, merely separated from the investor. Sauron could and did rebuild slowly, painfully over the course of 1,000 years, but rebuild nonetheless. The existence of the ring was the foundation on which the rebuilding rested. As long as the ring endured, Sauron could endure. As long as the investment survived, the investor could recover. The destruction of the ring is different. The destruction of the ring does not merely separate Sauron from his power. The destruction annihilates the power itself, releases it, disperses it, scatters it beyond any possibility of reassembly. There is no rebuilding after this. There is no recovery. The power that Sauron invested in the ring is not lost. It is destroyed, unmade, returned to the undifferentiated energy of the earth, dissolved into the fires from which it was first drawn. The investment has been liquidated. The account is closed. The funds are gone. Sauron, after the ring's destruction, is a being without resources. Not merely without an army, not merely without a fortress. Without the fundamental spiritual energy that makes existence possible. Sauron can think. Sauron can be aware. But Sauron cannot act, cannot take form, cannot project will, cannot touch or shape or influence the world in any way. The being who was one of the most powerful Maiar in existence has been reduced to the spiritual equivalent of a wisp of smoke, present. Technically real, but without substance, without effect, without the capacity to do anything except exist in a state of permanent, irreversible impotence. Part 30. What the fire undid. The destruction of the ring in the fires of Mount Doom is not merely the destruction of an object. It is the undoing of an act, the reversal of the investment that Sauron made when he forged the ring in the same fires 3,000 years earlier. When Sauron forged the ring, he took his power out of himself and placed it in an object. When the ring is destroyed, the power is released from the object, but it does not return to Sauron. The power is simply gone. Dissipated, released into the fire and the air and the stone, scattered beyond recovery, spread so thin that no act of will or craft could ever reassemble it. The destruction is permanent because the investment was permanent. Sauron cannot recover the power that he placed in the ring because the power, once invested, became the ring's power, became part of the object, inseparable from the gold, woven into the structure of the artifact. When the artifact is destroyed, the power is destroyed with it. The fire does not freeze Sauron's power. The fire annihilates it. This is the final cost of the investment. The being who placed his power outside himself has lost that power forever. The being who trusted an external object with his essence has had his essence unmade when the object was unmade. The gamble failed. The investment collapsed. And the investor, the being who bet everything on a single piece of gold, is left with nothing. The fire of Mount Doom is the same fire that Sauron used to forge the ring. The same fire that channeled the creative energies of the earth into the ring's creation now channels those energies into the ring's destruction. The craft is reversed. The making is unmade. The fire that served Sauron's purpose now serves the opposite purpose, and Sauron, who once stood before this fire as a maker, is now destroyed by it as a making. Part 31. The three rings fade. There is a consequence of the ring's destruction that is often treated as a side effect, but that is actually central to understanding the full scope of what Sauron did when he forged the ring. When the One Ring is destroyed, the three elven rings lose their power. Narya, Nenya, Vilya, the three rings that Celebrimbor forged without Sauron's direct touch, the rings that the elves wore to preserve and protect and heal, these rings fade. They become ordinary jewelry. The power that sustained Lothlorien, that guarded Rivendell, that kindled the hearts of the free peoples, this power evaporates. Gone. As if it had never been. Why? Because the three are part of the system. The three were made using the techniques that Sauron taught. The three depend, at the deepest level, on the same magical infrastructure that the One Ring controls. When the One is destroyed, the system collapses, and the three, which were sustained by the system, collapse with it. The fading of the three tells us something crucial about the scope of Sauron's investment. Sauron did not merely forge a ring. Sauron designed an entire system, a network of interconnected magical artifacts, a web of power that linked every ring to every other ring. A structure of domination that extended from the one at the center to the three, the seven, and the nine at the periphery. The One Ring was the keystone of this system, and when the keystone is removed, the arch falls. The destruction of the ring does not merely destroy Sauron. It destroys the entire ringcraft tradition, the entire body of knowledge and technique that Sauron brought to Eregion, the entire magical infrastructure that the rings represent. The elves lose their rings. The dwarves have already lost theirs. The men lost theirs long ago. The entire ring system, the entire network, the entire web, the entire architecture of power that Sauron designed is unmade. Sauron's legacy is erased. The being who designed a system to outlast him has seen his system destroyed with him. The craftsman's greatest work is consumed by the same fire that consumes the craftsman. Nothing remains. No rings, no system, no power, no legacy. Just the empty settings on elven fingers and the memory of what the rings once did. The erasure is total, and it is merciless. 3,000 years of rings sustained beauty, the golden light of Lothlorien, the healing power of Rivendell, the courage kindled by Narya. All of it evaporates in the instant that the One Ring melts in the fire. The beauty that the elves preserved through the three was, at the deepest level, sustained by the same system that Sauron designed for the purpose of domination. The beauty was real, the preservation was genuine. But the foundation was Sauron's, and when the foundation is destroyed, everything built on the foundation collapses. There is a deep sadness in this. The free peoples win the war. The ring is destroyed. Sauron is ended. But the victory comes with a price that cannot be avoided and cannot be reversed. The world that the elves preserved, the world of Lothlorien's golden trees, of Rivendell's healing waters, of the deep, slow, ancient beauty that the three sustained, cannot survive the destruction of the system that sustained it. The free peoples must choose, keep the ring and keep the beauty, but keep Sauron's system and keep the possibility of Sauron's return, or destroy the ring and destroy the beauty with it, ending Sauron but ending the elven world as well. The choice is not really a choice. The ring must be destroyed. But the cost of the destruction is borne not only by Sauron, but by the elves, by the beings who used the three for good, who preserved and healed and sustained through the power that Sauron's system provided. The innocent pay for the guilty's destruction. The good lose their tools when the evil loses his weapon. The fire that unmakes the ring unmakes everything the rings sustained. Part 32. The theological meaning. Let me step back from the narrative and address the theological dimension of the story. Because Tolkien, who was a devout Catholic, and who insisted that his work was a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, embedded theological meaning in the ring story that most readers miss. The story of the ring is a story about the sin of pride. Not pride in the ordinary sense, not vanity or arrogance or self-congratulation. Pride in the theological sense, the sin of placing yourself at the center of the universe, of making yourself the measure of all things, of treating your own will as the highest authority and your own desires as the ultimate justification. Sauron commits this sin when he forges the ring. The ring is the instrument of Sauron's will, the tool that extends Sauron's control, that amplifies Sauron's power, that makes Sauron the center of a system in which every other being is subordinate to Sauron's purpose. The ring is the physical manifestation of pride, the concrete expression of the belief that one's own will is supreme, and that the wills of others exist only to be dominated. The punishment for this sin is built into the sin itself. The being who places himself at the center of the universe discovers that the universe does not cooperate. The being who makes himself the measure of all things discovers that there are things he cannot measure. The being who treats his own will as supreme discovers that his will is limited, and the limitation is the very instrument that he created to extend it. The ring limits Sauron. The ring narrows Sauron. The ring traps Sauron. The ring, the instrument of Sauron's pride, is the instrument of Sauron's destruction. The punishment is not imposed from outside. The punishment is the inevitable, structurally necessary consequence of the sin itself. Pride destroys the proud. The ring destroys the ring maker. The instrument of domination dominates its creator. Part 33. Why the ring betrays. The ring's tendency to betray its bearer is one of the most commented upon aspects of the story, but the betrayal is usually discussed from the bearer's perspective. Let me discuss it from Sauron's perspective, because the betrayal tells us something important about what the ring has become. The ring betrays Isildur. The ring slips from Isildur's finger at the Gladden Fields, exposing him to the orc arrows that kill him. The ring betrays Gollum. The ring abandons Gollum in the tunnels beneath the Misty Mountains, allowing itself to be found by Bilbo. The ring, in a sense, betrays Frodo, overcoming his will at the last moment, claiming him at the crack of doom, refusing to be surrendered voluntarily. Why does the ring betray? The standard explanation is that the ring is trying to return to Sauron, that the ring's betrayals are attempts to find a more powerful bearer who will carry it back to Mordor. This explanation is partially correct. But I think there is a deeper truth. The ring betrays because the ring is Sauron. And Sauron betrays. Sauron betrayed Morgoth, not actively, not deliberately, but functionally. When Morgoth fell, Sauron did not attempt to rescue him. Sauron did not try to continue Morgoth's mission. Sauron rebuilt his own empire, pursued his own goals, redirected the resources of Morgoth's legacy towards Sauron's own purposes. Sauron took what Morgoth left behind and used it for himself. Sauron betrayed the elves, offering gifts that were traps, sharing knowledge that was poison, building a system of collaboration that was actually a system of enslavement. Sauron betrayed Ar-Pharazôn, corrupting the king of Menor with false promises, leading the Enmenrians to their destruction, while Sauron's spirit escaped. Betrayal is Sauron's nature, and the ring, being Sauron, shares that nature. The ring betrays its bearers, because betrayal is what Sauron does. The ring cannot be loyal, because Sauron is not loyal. The ring cannot be trusted, because Sauron cannot be trusted. The ring is a piece of Sauron's soul, and Sauron's soul is the soul of a betrayer. The irony is that the ring's betrayals work against Sauron. The ring's betrayal of Isildur loses the ring in the Anduin. The ring's betrayal of Gollum puts the ring in the hands of Bilbo and eventually Frodo. The ring's betrayals move the ring further from Sauron, not closer. The ring's Sauron nature, the treacherous, self-serving, fundamentally disloyal nature that Sauron poured into the ring, is the force that keeps the ring away from Sauron. Sauron is betrayed by his own betrayal. The treachery that he invested in the ring turns against him. The nature that he placed in the object works against the object's return to its maker. The ring is too much like Sauron, too treacherous, too self-serving, too fundamentally incapable of loyalty to serve Sauron faithfully. Part 34. The corruption mechanism. How does the ring corrupt? The question seems simple, but the answer reveals the deepest layer of what Sauron put into the ring and what the ring takes from those who carry it. The ring corrupts by amplification. The ring takes existing desires, normal, natural, understandable desires, and magnifies them until they consume the bearer. The ring takes Boromir's desire to protect his city and magnifies it into the desire to dominate the world. The ring takes Galadriel's desire to preserve the beauty of Lothlorien and magnifies it into the desire to replace Sauron as the Dark Lord. The ring takes Frodo's desire to complete his mission and magnifies it into the desire to claim the ring for himself. The amplification works because the ring is Sauron, and Sauron's defining characteristic is the transformation of good impulses into evil ones. Sauron's own corruption followed the same pattern. The love of order became the love of control. The gift for making became the gift for dominating. The desire to serve became the desire to rule. Sauron was corrupted by the amplification of his own best qualities, and the ring, containing Sauron's nature, corrupts others through the same mechanism. The corruption is personalized. The ring does not offer the same temptation to every bearer. The ring studies its bearer. The ring finds the desire, the deepest, most fundamental, most noble desire, and feeds it. The ring makes the bearer believe that the ring can fulfill the desire, can protect the city, preserve the beauty, complete the mission. The ring makes the bearer believe that wearing the ring is not a surrender but a triumph, not a fall but an elevation. This personalized corruption is Sauron's gift. This is the craft that Sauron brought to the ring's forging, the understanding of other beings' desires, the ability to read the hearts of the powerful and the humble alike, the skill of the deceiver who knows exactly which lie to tell to which person. The ring inherits this skill. The ring is a masterwork of persuasion, a persuasion machine, a corruption engine, an instrument that turns the best of people into the worst by convincing them that the worst is the best. Part 35. The Hobbit Resistance. The Hobbit's resistance to the ring is, from Sauron's perspective, inexplicable, and the inexplicability is itself a consequence of what the ring did to Sauron. Hobbits resist the ring better than any other race. Bilbo carries the ring for 60 years and is able to give it up voluntarily, something that no other bearer in the history of the ring has accomplished. Frodo carries the ring for months through the most hostile territory in Middle-earth and resists its corruption longer than any other bearer in the history of the ring. Sam carries the ring briefly and gives it back without hesitation, without even a moment of serious temptation. Why? What is it about hobbits that makes them resistant to the ring's corruption? The answer, I think, is that hobbits lack the thing that the ring feeds on. Hobbits do not have grand ambitions. Hobbits do not desire power. Hobbits do not dream of ruling the world or commanding armies or building empires. Hobbits dream of gardens and second breakfasts and pipe weed and the quiet pleasures of a life lived within the boundaries of the ordinary. The ring cannot amplify what does not exist. The ring works by magnifying existing desires. If the desire is small, if the desire is for a larger garden or a better crop of mushrooms, then the magnified desire is still small. The ring can make Sam fantasize about turning Mordor into a garden. But the ring cannot make Sam fantasize about turning Mordor into an empire, because the desire for empire does not exist in Sam's nature. Sauron cannot understand this resistance, because Sauron cannot understand the desire for the ordinary. The ring has trained Sauron to think in terms of power, and hobbits do not think in terms of power. Hobbits think in terms of comfort, of community, of the small pleasures that make a life worth living. These pleasures are invisible to Sauron, invisible to the eye, invisible to the ring, invisible to the entire apparatus of domination that Sauron has built. The hobbits are the ring's blind spot, and the blind spot is the crack through which the ring is carried to its destruction. Part 36. What the ring reveals about Sauron. The ring is a self-portrait. The ring is Sauron painted in gold, a revelation of his nature, a map of his psychology, a mirror of his deepest impulses and most fundamental flaws. Every quality of the ring is a quality of Sauron. The ring dominates. Sauron dominates. The ring betrays. Sauron betrays. The ring corrupts by amplifying desires. Sauron corrupts by amplifying desires. The ring cannot comprehend the voluntary surrender of power. Sauron cannot comprehend the voluntary surrender of power. The ring is beautiful. Sauron was beautiful once, before the corruption, before the fall, before the investment that drained his beauty and replaced it with the eye. The beauty of the ring is the beauty that Sauron lost, the last remnant of the fair form that Sauron wore in Eregion, preserved in gold, frozen in the moment before the disguise was shattered. The ring is seductive. Sauron was seductive, the great deceiver, the gift-giver, the being who could charm the most suspicious elf into collaboration. The seductive quality of the ring is the quality of Sauron as Anatar, the ability to offer what people want, to present chains as gifts, to make slavery look like liberation. The ring is treacherous. Sauron is treacherous. The ring promises power and delivers slavery. Sauron promises gifts and delivers domination. The treachery is structural, woven into the nature of the object, as deeply embedded as the inscription that circles the band. The ring is lonely. This is the quality that most fans overlook. The ring is profoundly, desperately, cosmically lonely, a being that reaches out to every creature that comes near it, that grasps at every hand, that clings to every finger, that cannot bear to be alone. The loneliness of the ring is the loneliness of Sauron, the loneliness of a being who has alienated every creature in the world through his relentless drive to dominate, who has no friends, no allies, no relationships that are not based on fear or coercion, who exists at the center of an empire of slaves and calls it home. The ring reveals Sauron. The ring is the most honest thing Sauron has ever made. The one creation that does not lie about its maker's nature, that shows the world exactly what Sauron is, that makes Sauron's soul visible in the form of a golden band. Part 37. The Sauron Who Might Have Been. Let me pause here and consider a question that Tolkien raises but does not answer directly. What would Sauron have been without the ring? Not what would Sauron have been if he had never fallen. That question is hypothetical to the point of meaninglessness. But what would Sauron have been if he had pursued his goals without creating the ring? If he had chosen a different path to power? If he had relied on his own inherent abilities rather than investing them in an external object? The answer, I think, is that Sauron would have been more dangerous. A ring-less Sauron would have retained his full inherent power, the complete spiritual energy of a Maya, integrated within his being, accessible at will. A ring-less Sauron would have retained his shape-shifting ability, the capacity to take fair form, to deceive through beauty, to operate through charm and manipulation rather than force. A ring less Sauron would have retained his flexibility, the strategic creativity, the psychological range, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances that characterized his early career. A ring less Sauron would have been harder to detect, harder to confront, harder to defeat. The ring made Sauron visible. The ring exposed him to the elves. The ring identified him as the enemy. The ring gave the Free Peoples a target to aim at and a weakness to exploit. Without the ring, Sauron would have been a shadow in the dark, a hidden manipulator, a secret corrupter, a being who worked through agents and intermediaries and who never revealed himself until the trap had already closed. But a ring less Sauron would also have been less powerful. The ring gave Sauron the ability to dominate the ring bearers, an ability that, while it failed in its primary purpose, succeeded in its secondary purpose. Without the ring, Sauron would not have had the Nazgul. Without the Nazgul, Sauron would not have had the most effective instruments of terror and command in his arsenal. Without the instruments of terror and command, Sauron's empire would have been less terrifying and less commanded. The trade-off is the heart of the ring's tragedy. Sauron traded flexibility for power, subtlety for force, wholeness for reach. The trade made Sauron more powerful in the short term and more vulnerable in the long term. The trade gave Sauron the ability to build an empire and the certainty that the empire would eventually fall. Part 38. The Tragedy of Craft. There is a tragic dimension to the ring's story that goes beyond the military and the theological, a dimension that connects to Sauron's original nature as a Maya of all, as a craftsman, as a maker. The ring is the greatest work of craft in the history of Middle-earth. The ring is, from a purely technical standpoint, a masterpiece, a flawless object, perfectly designed, perfectly executed, incorporating the most advanced magical techniques that any being in Middle-earth has ever developed. The ring is the culmination of Sauron's craft, the final, supreme expression of the gift for making that all instilled in his servants before the world was made. And the ring is also the worst thing Sauron ever made. The tragedy of craft is the tragedy of the gifted maker who uses his gift for the wrong purpose. Sauron's gift for making is genuine. It is not a corruption. It is an original, God-given quality, a natural talent, a capacity for creation that was meant to serve the good. The corruption is not in the gift. The corruption is in the use. The gift is beautiful. The use is monstrous. And the gap between the beauty of the gift and the monstrosity of the use is the gap that defines Sauron's tragedy. Consider what Sauron could have made. Consider the works that Sauron's craft could have produced if it had remained in the service of all. If the gift for making had been directed toward beauty rather than domination, toward the enhancement of the world rather than the enslavement of the world. The craft that made the One Ring could have made objects of surpassing beauty and utility, tools that healed rather than harmed, instruments that liberated rather than enslaved, creations that added to the beauty of the world rather than subtracting from it. Instead, Sauron made the ring, the supreme expression of craft in the service of evil, the ultimate object of beauty in the service of ugliness, the masterwork that is also the master crime. The ring is the proof that talent is not enough, that the capacity for making does not guarantee the goodness of what is made, that the gift of craft can produce horrors as readily as wonders. The tragedy is intensified by the knowledge that Sauron knows what he is doing. Sauron is not a mindless instrument. Sauron is not a being who creates evil accidentally. Sauron chose. Sauron chose to redirect his gift from beauty to domination. Sauron chose to make the ring rather than making something good. The choice was free, was conscious, was deliberate, and the deliberateness of the choice is what makes it tragic rather than merely unfortunate. Part 39. The ring as prison. The ring is usually described as an instrument of freedom, a tool that expands the bearer's power, that extends the bearer's reach, that gives the bearer capabilities beyond the bearer's natural limitations. But for Sauron, the ring is the opposite. For Sauron, the ring is a prison. The ring imprisons Sauron in his own design. The ring locks Sauron into the identity of the Dominator, the identity that he built into the ring at the moment of forging, the identity that the ring preserves and reinforces and projects. Sauron cannot escape this identity. Sauron cannot grow beyond the ring's design. Sauron cannot change, cannot develop, cannot become anything other than the being who forged the ring in the fires of Mount Doom. This is, I think, the most terrible thing about the ring's effect on Sauron. The ring prevents growth. The ring prevents change. The ring prevents the possibility, however remote, however unlikely, that Sauron might one day choose differently, might one day turn from the path of domination, might one day exercise the free will that Ilúvatar gave to every being in creation and choose something other than evil. Tolkien believed in the possibility of redemption. Tolkien believed that every being, no matter how fallen, no matter how corrupted, no matter how deeply embedded in evil, retains the capacity to choose good. This belief is central to Tolkien's theology and central to his fiction. Gollum's mercy at the end of The Lord of the Rings, the pity that Bilbo showed, the pity that Frodo showed, the conviction that even the most wretched creature might yet be saved, is the expression of this belief. But the ring has, I think, closed this door for Sauron. The ring has locked Sauron into his identity so firmly that the possibility of change, the possibility of choosing differently, of turning from evil, of exercising the free will that is every being's birthright, has been extinguished. The ring has made Sauron a fixed point, a being who cannot move, cannot change, cannot grow. The ring has made Sauron what Morgoth became, a being whose corruption is so complete that the original nature is no longer accessible. The prison is Sauron's own construction. The walls are Sauron's own design. The lock is Sauron's own craft. And the key, the possibility of change, the capacity for growth, the freedom to choose, was thrown away when Sauron placed his essence in the ring and allowed the ring to define who he would be forever. Part 40. The comparative study. Let me compare Sauron's relationship with the ring to the relationships that other bearers have with the ring, because the comparisons illuminate the nature of the object and the nature of the damage it does. Gollum carries the ring for 478 years. During those 478 years, Gollum is transformed physically, psychologically, spiritually. Gollum's body changes. Gollum's mind fractures. Gollum's soul is consumed by the obsession with the ring. Gollum becomes a creature defined entirely by his relationship with the ring, a being whose every thought, every action, every instinct is oriented toward the possession and the protection of the precious. But Gollum's transformation is a shadow of Sauron's transformation. Gollum was a hobbit, a mortal, a small being, a creature of limited power and limited will. The ring overwhelmed Gollum quickly, completely, devastatingly. The transformation was total but shallow. The ring consumed Gollum's surface but did not reach Gollum's depths. Somewhere inside Gollum, the original Sméagol survived, diminished, buried, barely visible, but present. The original self was not destroyed. It was hidden. Sauron's transformation is deeper. Sauron was a Maya, a divine spirit, a being of immense power and immense will. The ring did not overwhelm Sauron the way it overwhelmed Gollum. The ring worked on Sauron slowly, subtly, over millennia. The transformation was gradual but total, not the sudden catastrophic collapse of a weak will, but the slow, imperceptible reshaping of a strong will, the patient, invisible narrowing of a vast intelligence, until the intelligence serves only one purpose. The difference is duration and depth. Gollum's corruption is fast and shallow. Sauron's corruption is slow and deep. Gollum's original self survives beneath the corruption. Sauron's original self does not survive, has been so thoroughly consumed by the ring's influence that the original Maya of Ol is no longer detectable beneath the Dark Lord of Mordor. Frodo's relationship with the ring provides another comparison. Frodo carries the ring as a known burden for approximately 6 months, from September 3018 to March 3019 of the Third Age, though he possessed it unknowingly for 17 years before that. During those final months, Frodo is progressively corrupted, increasingly possessive, increasingly suspicious, increasingly unable to perceive the world except through the lens of the ring's influence. But Frodo resists. Frodo fights the corruption. Frodo maintains his identity, his hobbit nature, his compassion, his capacity for friendship and trust against the ring's relentless pressure. And Frodo's resistance, though it ultimately fails at the crack of doom, demonstrates something important about the ring's corruption. It can be resisted. It can be fought. It can be slowed, if not stopped, by a will that is oriented towards something other than power. Sauron does not resist. Sauron has never resisted. Sauron has never fought the ring's corruption, because Sauron has never experienced the ring's corruption as something separate from his own will. The ring's desires are Sauron's desires. The ring's nature is Sauron's nature. There is no gap between the ring and Sauron, no space in which resistance could operate, no distance between the corrupter and the corrupted. The ring and Sauron are the same thing. And you cannot resist yourself. Part 41. The Power Paradox. The ring creates a paradox that is central to understanding Sauron's predicament. A paradox that Tolkien explores with the precision of a philosopher and the emotional intelligence of a poet. The paradox is this: the ring makes Sauron more powerful and more vulnerable at the same time. Every increase in power is accompanied by an equal increase in vulnerability. Every extension of reach is accompanied by an equal extension of exposure. The ring amplifies Sauron's capability and amplifies Sauron's weakness in perfect proportion. With the ring, Sauron can dominate the ring bearers. Without the ring, Sauron is barely capable of maintaining a physical form. With the ring, Sauron can project his will across the breadth of Middle-earth. Without the ring, Sauron's will barely extends beyond the walls of Barad-dûr. The difference between Sauron with the ring and Sauron without the ring is the difference between the Dark Lord of the Second Age and the Eye of the Third Age, the difference between a being of overwhelming power and a being of overwhelming impotence. But the ring can be lost. The ring can be taken. The ring can be carried to a volcano and destroyed. And when the ring is destroyed, Sauron is not merely reduced to his ringless state. Sauron is reduced below his ringless state, reduced to a shadow, a whisper, a formless, powerless, permanently impotent presence that can never again act in the world. The paradox is inescapable. Sauron cannot be powerful without the ring. The ring makes Sauron powerful, but also makes Sauron killable. Sauron's only path to power is the path that leads to the possibility of his own permanent destruction. The instrument that gives Sauron everything he wants is also the instrument that makes it possible for him to lose everything. This is not an accident. This is not a design flaw. This is the nature of the ring, and, Tolkien suggests, the nature of power itself. Power that is seized, power that is taken from its rightful place and invested in an instrument of control, always carries this paradox. The more you grasp, the more you can lose. The tighter you hold, the more brittle your grip becomes. The further you reach, the more exposed you are. Part 42. The Ring and the Silmarils. The comparison between the One Ring and the Silmarils illuminates a crucial distinction in Tolkien's theology of craft, a distinction between creation and domination that runs through the entire mythology. The Silmarils were made by Fëanor, the greatest of the elven smiths, the being whose name means Spirit of Fire, the creator of the most beautiful objects in the history of Middle-earth. The Silmarils contained the light of the two trees of Valinor, the light that illuminated the Blessed Realm before the sun and moon existed. The Silmarils were perfect. The Silmarils were holy. The Silmarils were, in Tolkien's theology, the greatest work of subcreation that any being other than Ilúvatar has ever achieved. And Fëanor suffered for the Silmarils. Fëanor became obsessive. Fëanor became possessive. Fëanor swore the terrible oath, the oath that bound him and his sons to recover the Silmarils at any cost, the oath that led to the kinslayings, the oath that drove the house of Fëanor to ruin. The Silmarils, like the ring, consumed their maker. The Silmarils, like the ring, became the center of their maker's existence. The Silmarils, like the ring, destroyed the being who created them. But there is a crucial difference. The Silmarils are not instruments of domination. The Silmarils do not contain Fëanor's power. The Silmarils do not give Fëanor the ability to control other wills. The Silmarils are pure, objects of beauty, containers of light, creations that express the best of their maker's nature rather than the worst. The ring is an instrument of domination. The ring contains Sauron's power. The ring gives Sauron the ability to control other wills. The ring is impure, an object of beauty that conceals an instrument of enslavement, a creation that expresses the worst of its maker's nature in the guise of the best. The Silmarils are what the ring could have been. The Silmarils are the alternative, the road not taken, the choice not made. The creation that might have been if Sauron's craft had been directed toward beauty rather than domination. The Silmarils are the proof that the craft of making does not inevitably produce instruments of evil, that the same gift that made the ring could have made something good, something beautiful, something that enhanced the world rather than enslaving it. The comparison is devastating for Sauron. Fëanor was a flawed maker, prideful, possessive, ultimately destructive. But Fëanor made beautiful things. Fëanor's craft produced the Silmarils, objects of genuine beauty, of real light, of actual holiness. Sauron's craft produced the ring, an object of domination, of enslavement, of the corruption of everything it touches. The difference between the two makers is the difference between a craftsman who is corrupted by his creation and a craftsman whose creation is a corruption. Part 43. The Final Form. By the end of the Third Age, Sauron has achieved his final form, and the final form tells us everything about what the ring has done to him. Sauron is the Eye, a lidless, sleepless, wreathed in flame eye at the summit of barad-dûr. Not a person, not a body, not a being that can walk or speak or forge or fight. An eye, a point of awareness, a consciousness that watches. The eye is what remains after the ring has finished its work. The eye is the end product of the process that began when Sauron first forged the ring and placed his power into an external object. The process has stripped away everything non-essential, everything that is not directly related to the ring's function, everything that does not serve the purpose of domination. The body is gone, the shape-shifting is gone, the charm is gone, the beauty is gone, the craft is gone. All that remains is the will to dominate, the naked, unadorned, unmediated impulse to control, stripped of every other quality, reduced to its purest form. The eye is Sauron's essence, the thing that is left when everything else has been removed. And the essence is domination. The essence is control. The essence is the burning, sleepless, relentless desire to see everything, to know everything, to control everything. This is what Sauron is after the ring has finished with him. This is what remains after 3,000 years of ring-shaped existence. A desire, a hunger, a void that wants to fill itself with the submission of every living thing. The eye cannot create. The eye cannot make. The eye cannot forge or build or shape. The Maya of all, the craftsman, the maker, the being whose original nature was the nature of a creator, has lost the capacity for creation. The ring has consumed the craft. The ring has swallowed the maker. The being who could once shape metal with his own hands can now only watch as others shape the world according to his will. The loss of craft is, I think, the most poignant of all the ring's consequences. The craft was the thing that was genuinely good in Sauron, the one quality that connected him to his original nature, to the divine gift that all bestowed on his servants, to the impulse that made the world rather than the impulse that corrupted it. The ring has taken this quality. The ring has consumed the one good thing that Sauron retained. The maker has been unmade by his own making. Part 44. The ring's memory. There is a haunting question that the story raises but does not explicitly answer. Does the ring remember? The ring contains the greater part of Sauron's being. The ring contains Sauron's will, Sauron's nature, Sauron's capacity for domination. But does the ring contain Sauron's memories? Does the ring remember Valinor? Does the ring remember all? Does the ring remember the time before the corruption? The time when Sauron was a faithful Maya, a servant of the good, a craftsman who shaped the world with love? I think the ring does remember, but the memories are buried, inaccessible, sealed beneath the layers of corruption that define the ring's active identity. The ring remembers the way a dream remembers, vaguely, distantly, without the context that would make the memories meaningful. The ring remembers beauty, but has forgotten why beauty matters. The ring remembers creation, but has forgotten that creation is good. The ring remembers the fire of All's forge, but can only express that memory as the fire of domination. The ring's beauty is a memory. The gold, the perfect craftsmanship, the simple elegance of the design, these are echoes of the beauty that Sauron once served. The beauty that All's servants were taught to create. The beauty that was the original purpose of the craft that made the ring. The ring is beautiful because Sauron's craft was originally in the service of beauty. And the beauty persists, distorted, corrupted, perverted from its original purpose, but still recognizable, still present, still glimmering beneath the layers of domination and betrayal. This is why the ring is seductive. The ring seduces because the ring is beautiful, and the beauty is real, is genuine, is a true echo of the good that Sauron's craft was once capable of producing. The ring promises beauty, and the promise is not entirely false. The beauty is there, buried, corrupted, inaccessible except through the act of domination that the ring demands, but there. The tragedy of the ring is that the beauty is real and the corruption is real, and the two are inseparable, woven together in the same object, expressed in the same gold, embodied in the same perfect band. Part 45. The question of sentience. Is the ring sentient? Does the ring think? Does the ring have a consciousness, a mind, an awareness, an experience of being a ring? The question is not idle. Tolkien describes the ring as having a will, a purpose, a desire, an intention. The ring wants to be found. The ring wants to be worn. The ring wants to return to its master. These are the descriptions of a sentient being, not of an inert object. But the ring's sentience is, I think, incomplete. The ring does not have a full consciousness. The ring does not think in sentences. The ring does not have opinions or preferences or beliefs. The ring is sentient in the way that a plant is sentient, aware, responsive, oriented toward its goals, but not self-aware, not reflective, not capable of the kind of introspection that characterizes a fully conscious mind. The ring's sentience is Sauron's sentience, diluted, simplified, reduced to its most basic form. The ring has Sauron's will, but not Sauron's intelligence. The ring has Sauron's purpose, but not Sauron's strategy. The ring has Sauron's desire to dominate, but not Sauron's capacity to plan the domination. The ring is an instinct, the instinct to control, extracted from the mind that produced it, operating independently, without the guidance of the intelligence that originally shaped it. This is, I think, one of the most disturbing implications of the ring's creation. Sauron has created a fragment of himself that operates without his control. A piece of his own consciousness that acts on its own, that makes decisions on its own, that manipulates and corrupts and betrays on its own. The ring is Sauron's unconscious, the deep, primal, unreasoning will to dominate that lives beneath Sauron's conscious mind, extracted and given physical form. The ring acts out Sauron's deepest impulses, the impulses that Sauron himself might not fully understand, the drives that operate below the level of conscious awareness, the instincts that shape Sauron's behavior without his knowledge. The ring is Sauron's id, the raw, unprocessed, undirected will to control that is the foundation of Sauron's conscious personality. And the id, given its own body and its own will, does not behave the way the conscious mind would want it to behave. Part 46. The Sauron Paradox. Let me frame the central paradox of Sauron's relationship with the ring, the paradox that contains the answer to the question in the title of this video. What really happened to Sauron when he wore the One Ring? He became more of what he was, and less of what he could have been. He amplified his nature, and narrowed his nature. He extended his reach, and shortened his lifespan. He multiplied his power, and divided his self. He achieved his goal, and destroyed his future. The ring did not change Sauron from good to evil. Sauron was already evil. The ring changed Sauron from complex evil to simple evil, from a multifaceted, strategically creative, psychologically flexible villain to a single-minded, rigid, narrowly focused instrument of domination. The ring stripped away everything in Sauron that was not domination: the craft, the beauty, the charm, the flexibility, the creativity, and left only the core, the will to control. The ring did not make Sauron stronger. The ring made Sauron more powerful and more fragile at the same time, amplifying his capacity for domination while creating a vulnerability that any sufficiently determined hobbit could exploit. The ring gave Sauron the ability to build an empire and the certainty that the empire would collapse if a small piece of gold was dropped into a fire. The ring did not make Sauron a better villain. The ring made Sauron a less effective villain, a villain who could not deceive, could not charm, could not adapt, could not perceive the small and the humble, could not imagine the voluntary surrender of power. The ring made Sauron predictable. The ring made Sauron blind. The ring made Sauron the architect of his own defeat. The ring made Sauron himself. The ring crystallized Sauron's identity, fixed it, preserved it, hardened it into the form that it would hold forever. The ring took the fluid, changeable, adaptable being that Sauron was and turned him into the fixed, rigid, unchangeable being that Sauron became. The ring gave Sauron an identity, and the identity was a death sentence. Part 47. The Moment of Understanding. Let me return one last time to the moment on Mount Doom, the moment when Frodo claims the ring and Sauron perceives, with terrible clarity, what is about to happen. In that moment, Sauron understands everything. Sauron understands that the ring is about to be destroyed. He understands that his power, the greater part of his being, the essence that he placed in the ring 3,000 years ago, is about to be unmade. He understands that the strategy he has pursued for 3 millennia, the strategy of recovery, of reclamation, of reunion with the lost part of himself, has failed. The ring will not return. The ring will be destroyed. And Sauron, who cannot exist without the ring, will be destroyed with it. But Sauron also understands, and this is the devastating part, why Sauron understands in that moment of terrible clarity, that the ring's destruction is not an accident. It is not bad luck. It is not the result of a strategic error or a tactical mistake or a failure of intelligence. The ring's destruction is the logical consequence of the ring's nature, the inevitable outcome of the choice that Sauron made when he forged the ring and placed his essence in an external object. The ring was always going to be destroyed. The ring was always going to be taken. The ring was always going to betray its maker. Because the ring is Sauron, and Sauron betrays. Because the ring is domination, and domination creates the resistance that eventually overthrows the dominator. Because the ring is pride, and pride creates the blindness that eventually destroys the proud. Sauron sees this. In the last moment, Sauron sees the entire arc of his existence, from the forging of the ring to the destruction of the ring, from the first wearing to the last burning, from the moment of seeming triumph to the moment of final destruction. And what Sauron sees is not a story of defeat by an external enemy. What Sauron sees is a story of self-destruction, a story of a being who built his own prison, forged his own chains, and crafted his own death, and who did it with the consummate skill of the greatest maker in the history of Middle-earth. Part 48. The Cost to the World. The ring's destruction saves the world. But the world that is saved is not the world that existed before the ring was forged. The ring's creation set in motion a chain of consequences that permanently altered Middle-earth. The war against Sauron consumed kingdoms. The elves, deprived of the 3 rings' power after the One's destruction, begin their final departure from Middle-earth, the great departure, the sailing west, the withdrawal of the firstborn from the world that they helped to shape. Lothlorien fades. Rivendell empties. The elven presence that has sustained the beauty and the magic of the mortal world diminishes until only the memory remains. The dwarves are diminished. The 7 rings, distributed among the dwarf lords, amplified the dwarves' native tendencies, their love of gold, their pride in craft, their fierce independence. 3 of the 7 were consumed by dragonfire. The others were recovered by Sauron. The dwarven kingdoms, weakened by the ring's influence and by the wars and the dragons that the rings attracted, decline into the 4th Age. Still proud, still stubborn, still deeply rooted in the stone, but fewer, less powerful, less central to the story of the world. The men are transformed. The 9 kings who wore the 9 rings are destroyed, their identities consumed, their kingdoms forgotten, their very names erased from history. The civilization of Menor, corrupted by Sauron's influence, was drowned beneath the sea. Gondor, exhausted by the long war against Mordor, survives but is diminished. The world of men that emerges from the War of the Ring is a world that has been shaped by the ring, scarred by it, changed by it, permanently altered by the consequences of a Maya's decision to pour his power into a band of gold. The ring's destruction heals the wound, but the scar remains. The world after the ring is not the world before the ring. The beauty that the ring's existence destroyed, the elven kingdoms, the dwarven halls, the Enmenrian civilization, cannot be restored. The damage is permanent. The cost is real. The ring saved Sauron from his own limitations and cost the world its innocence. Part 49. The Final Accounting. Let me attempt a final accounting, a complete reckoning of what the ring cost Sauron and what the ring cost the world. The ring cost Sauron his power. The greater part of Sauron's inherent spiritual energy was invested in the ring. Energy that, when the ring was destroyed, was permanently lost. The being who was one of the most powerful Maiar in existence was reduced, after the ring's destruction, to a powerless, formless, permanently impotent shadow. The ring cost Sauron his form. The ability to take physical shape, to walk among the living, to speak with a voice, to act with hands, was progressively eroded by the ring's influence and the loss of the ring's presence. The being who once took fair form became the Eye. The being who once charmed the elves of a region became a lidless point of burning awareness. The ring cost Sauron his craft. The gift for making, the original, God-given talent that connected Sauron to his divine nature, was consumed by the ring's demand for domination. The maker became the destroyer. The craftsman became the tyrant. The Maia of Ol became the Lord of Mordor. The ring cost Sauron his flexibility. The shapeshifter became the fixed point. The deceiver became the brute. The being of many forms became the being of one form. The Eye, the Dark Lord. The single, narrow, rigid identity that the ring preserved and reinforced. The ring cost Sauron his imagination. The mind that once conceived of the most ambitious deception in the history of Middle-earth, the Anatar Gambit, the centuries-long infiltration of the elven smiths, became a mind that could not conceive of the possibility that someone might choose to destroy power rather than use it. The strategic genius became the strategic prisoner, a mind of vast capability trapped in a single, endlessly repeated pattern. The ring cost Sauron his future. The ring, once destroyed, ended Sauron permanently. Not disembodied. Not diminished. Ended. The being who might have existed forever, who might, in some unimaginable future, have turned from evil, have redeemed himself, have exercised the free will that every being retains, was permanently terminated by the destruction of the object in which he had placed his essence. And the ring cost Sauron himself. The being who forged the ring was not the being who was destroyed by the ring's destruction. 3,000 years of ring-shaped existence had transformed Sauron so thoroughly that the original being, the Maia of Ol, the servant of the divine order, the craftsman who loved making, was no longer present. The ring destroyed Sauron long before the fire of Mount Doom destroyed the ring. The ring consumed Sauron's identity. The fire merely consumed what was left. Part 50. The answer. What really happened to Sauron when he wore the One Ring? He became the ring. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. Literally. The being who poured the greater part of his essence into an external object merged with the object became defined by the object, constrained by the object, identified with the object to such an extent that the distinction between maker and made dissolved. Sauron wore the ring. The ring wore Sauron. The boundary between the two, between the bearer and the born, between the craftsman and the craft, between the master and the instrument, ceased to exist. The wearing of the ring was not a moment of mastery. It was a moment of fusion, the moment when Sauron's identity and the ring's identity became the same identity, when Sauron's will and the ring's will became the same will, when the question who controls whom became unanswerable because the two entities had become one. The fusion explains everything. The fusion explains why Sauron cannot take the ring off, because taking the ring off would be amputating part of himself. The fusion explains why the ring's destruction destroys Sauron, because the ring is not a possession but a body part, not an object but an organ, not a weapon but a limb. The fusion explains why the ring acts independently, because the ring is a fragment of Sauron's consciousness, operating on its own, expressing Sauron's will without Sauron's awareness. The fusion explains why Sauron becomes the eye, because the ring has consumed everything else, has absorbed every other function, has left only the consciousness that watches and the will that dominates. Sauron put the ring on, and the ring put Sauron on. The wearing went both ways. The merger was mutual. The maker became the made. The craftsman became the craft. The being who forged the ring in the fires of Mount Doom was, in the moment of the first wearing, consumed by the fires of his own creation. Part 51. The lesson of the ring. Tolkien is not subtle about the lesson. The lesson is embedded in every dimension of the ring's story, in the forging, in the wearing, in the losing, in the finding, in the destruction. Power that is seized destroys the seizer. This is the lesson. Power that is grasped, power that is taken from its proper place and concentrated in the hands of a being who wants to use it for domination, does not serve the being who grasps it. The power serves itself. The power pursues its own logic. The power follows its own trajectory. And the trajectory always leads to the same destination, the destruction of the being who thought he was the power's master. Sauron seized power. Sauron took his own inherent power, the God-given, divinely bestowed, cosmically significant spiritual energy of a Maya, and concentrated it in an instrument of domination. And the instrument destroyed him. Not immediately, not violently, slowly, patiently, subtly, over the course of 3,000 years, the instrument consumed the being who made it, absorbed the identity that created it, and finally, when the instrument was unmade, took the being with it into annihilation. The lesson applies beyond Sauron. The lesson applies to every bearer of the ring. Gollum seizes the ring and is consumed by it. Isildur seizes the ring and is killed by it. Boromir tries to seize the ring and is destroyed by the attempt. Every being who grasps for the ring's power is destroyed by the grasping, not because the ring is malicious, but because the act of grasping for power is, in Tolkien's theology, self-destructive. The desire to dominate is the desire that destroys the desirer. The beings who survive the ring are the beings who do not grasp. Bilbo gives the ring up. Sam gives the ring back. Frodo carries the ring to its destruction. Gandalf refuses the ring entirely. Galadriel refuses the ring entirely. Aragorn refuses the ring entirely. The beings who survive are the beings who choose not to seize, who choose to surrender power rather than to wield it, who choose to resist the fundamental temptation of the ring, which is the temptation to believe that power is the answer. Part 52. The ring as mirror. There is a final way of understanding the ring that brings the entire story into focus, a way that Tolkien embeds in the narrative but that most readers discover only on reflection. The ring is a mirror. The ring shows you who you are, not who you want to be, not who you pretend to be, who you are at the deepest, most fundamental, most inescapable level of your being. The ring finds the desire, the real desire, the core desire, the desire that lives beneath all the other desires, and magnifies it until it becomes visible. Boromir looks into the ring and sees a warrior king who can save his city. This is who Boromir really is, beneath the bravery, beneath the loyalty, beneath the honor. A man who wants to save his people and who believes, at the deepest level, that power is the only way to save them. Galadriel looks into the ring and sees a queen who can replace Sauron, terrible and beautiful and worshipped by all. This is who Galadriel could become. The version of herself that power would create. The being that the ring's amplification would produce if Galadriel surrendered to the temptation. Sam looks into the ring and sees a garden. This is who Sam really is. At the deepest level, beneath everything else, a gardener. A being whose fundamental desire is to make things grow. The ring cannot corrupt this desire, because the desire is too simple, too good, too deeply rooted in the nature of a hobbit who loves the earth. And Sauron? What does Sauron see when he looks into the ring? Sauron sees himself. Sauron sees the eye, the lidless, sleepless, burning awareness that he will become. Sauron sees the narrowing, the progressive contraction of his identity, the slow reduction of a complex being to a simple instrument. Sauron sees the prison, the locked, fixed, unchangeable identity that the ring will impose on him. But Sauron does not recognize what he sees. Sauron looks into the mirror and does not recognize his own reflection, because the reflection is so different from the image that Sauron has of himself that the two cannot be reconciled. Sauron believes that he is the ring's master. The mirror shows him that he is the ring's servant. Sauron believes that he is using the ring. The mirror shows him that the ring is using him. Sauron believes that he is in control. The mirror shows him that he has never been in control, that the control he exercises is the control that the ring allows him to exercise, that the power he wields is the power that the ring permits him to wield, that the identity he inhabits is the identity that the ring has constructed for him. The mirror shows the truth, but the truth is invisible to the being who most needs to see it. Part 53. The End of Sauron. Sauron ends, not with a battle, not with a final confrontation between good and evil, not with a heroic stand or a dramatic last speech or a defiant gesture in the face of defeat. Sauron ends with a fire and a wind. The fire consumes the ring. The wind disperses the shadow. And Sauron, the Maya of all, the lieutenant of Morgoth, the Lord of the Rings, the Eye of barad-dûr, is gone. The ending is fitting. The ending matches the crime. Sauron's crime was the crime of making. The crime of using the gift of craft to create an instrument of domination. The crime of taking the divine gift and redirecting it toward the enslavement of the world. And the punishment is the reversal of the making, the unmaking of the ring, the dissolution of the craft, the return of the invested power to the fire from which it came. The fire does not judge. The fire does not condemn. The fire simply unmakes, reverses the process that Sauron initiated 3,000 years earlier, releases the energy that Sauron bound, dissolves the structure that Sauron built. The fire is neutral. The fire is impersonal. The fire is the same fire that Sauron used to forge the ring, the same creative energy, the same foundational force, doing exactly what it did before, but in reverse. The wind is not neutral. The wind comes from the west, from the direction of the Blessed Realm, from the direction of the Valar, from the source of the divine authority that Sauron rejected when he chose Morgoth over his original master. The wind is judgment. The wind is the divine response to Sauron's rebellion, the final, definitive, irrevocable dismissal of the being who turned from the service of the good to the pursuit of domination. The fire unmakes, the wind dismisses. And between the two, between the neutral force of unmaking and the divine force of judgment, Sauron is ended. The ending is quiet. There is no explosion. There is no dramatic collapse. There is just a shadow on the wind, dispersing, fading, becoming nothing. The most ambitious, most capable, most strategically brilliant villain in the history of fantasy fiction ends not with a bang, but with a dispersal, a scattering of shadow, a dissolution of will, a fading of awareness into the nothing that waits beyond the edge of the world. Part 54. The Ring's Legacy. What remains after Sauron is gone? The ring is destroyed. The three are powerless. The 9 are dissolved with the Nazgul. The 7 are consumed or recovered. The entire system of the Rings of Power, the most ambitious magical project in the history of Middle-earth, is ended. The craft is lost. The knowledge is lost. The techniques that Sauron taught the elves of Eregion, the methods that produced the rings, the understanding of how to bind power to metal and will to gold, all of it is gone. The elves depart. Galadriel sails west. Elrond sails west. Gandalf sails west, his mission complete, his task fulfilled, his service to Middle-earth ended by the destruction of the evil that he was sent to oppose. The age of the elves ends. The age of men begins. The world moves on into a future that does not include the rings, that does not include the magic, that does not include the beauty that the rings preserved. The loss is real. The loss is permanent. The world after the ring is a world that has lost something irreplaceable. The elvish beauty, the elven wisdom, the deep, slow, patient quality of a world that was sustained by the power of the three. The world after the ring is a world for men, a world of mortality, of change, of the relentless forward motion of time that the elves' rings had slowed and the elves' presence had softened. But the world after the ring is also a free world, a world that is no longer threatened by the shadow of domination, a world in which the free peoples can shape their own future without the interference of a dark lord who wants to control every living thing. A world in which power is distributed, shared, contested, negotiated, never concentrated in a single point that can be seized and used to enslave everything else. The ring's legacy is absence. The ring's legacy is the empty space where the ring used to be. The void left by the destruction of the most powerful object in Middle-earth, the gap in the world's power structure that no future Dark Lord will be able to fill. The ring is gone, and because the ring is gone, the world is free, free from the specific threat of the ring, free from the possibility of the ring's misuse, free from the shadow of domination that the ring cast over every corner of Middle-earth for 3,000 years. The ring is gone, and Sauron is gone, and the world goes on. Thank you for spending this evening with me. The story of the ring is usually told from the perspective of the bearers, from the perspective of Frodo and Bilbo and Gollum, from the perspective of the beings who carried the ring and were changed by the carrying. But the story of the ring, told from Sauron's perspective, is a different story. A story not of bearing, but of making, not of carrying, but of investing, not of the burden of possession, but of the burden of creation. The ring is Sauron's story. The ring is the story of a being who made something that was greater than himself and was consumed by the making. The craftsman forged the ring, and the ring forged the craftsman. And the forging, in the end, destroyed them both, the maker and the made, the bearer and the born, the dark spirit and the golden band, falling together into the fire from which they came, dissolving together into the heat and the light and the silence that waits at the end of all making. Until next time.